Am I
Not
wrong?
at all. No, you aren't. But the issue of Bolivia was probably the first time where I think they've been taken to task so publicly in a number of mainstream Western publications. Their role, I mean, they were instrumental. There's simply no other way to put it. Without the OAS, without their statements, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the Bolivian election, it's hard to see how the coup would have been able to succeed. And I think they realize they're sort of on thin ice, and with the seat of the Lima group, that's Peru, now looking to fall into the hands of a left-wing union organizer. Right. It seems like the Lima group, another method of sort of exerting U.S. control in the region, that's got to be on the way out as well. So, I think in this broader context, the OAS, call them what you will, they're not stupid, right? They see the way the winds are blowing. And they may be shifting course accordingly. I don't think that makes them anything other than, what Fidel Castro described as effectively just an instrument of U.S. imperialism. But I do think that they are learning that they may need to shift their tactics a little bit, if for no other reason than strategic purposes.
Fair enough. So what were the speakers there? Who were the people who were attending the event? You said they were Evo Morales. You said that, of course, Nicolas Maduro was running the place, running the country. Arce. Who else? Who else was there? I mean, because whoever is there is basically showing solidarity with Venezuela. And Venezuela, considering that they're pretending as if Juan Guaido... I mean, it's hard to get across how wild that is. Meaning, let's say that China just said, you know what? When Donald Trump got elected, there was a lot of people that were protesting. So we're going to go with Nancy Pelosi. We think Nancy Pelosi, being Speaker of the House, is president now of the United States. And every time somebody talks about, they say, here's Nancy Pelosi, the person who we call president of the United States. That would be utterly insane under any circumstance. And yet, that's what happens with Guaido. And that wasn't changed from Biden. Like, so I'm trying to get across this notion that there is a specific intentional push against that country. And whatever leader is there is doing that under that knowledge, meaning we don't care. We're standing in solidarity in this situation. I mean, I think it's fascinating. That's why I'm asking, what are the leaders are there in addition to Bolivia?
A number of people spoke, especially a former president of the Senate of Bolivia during the coup, Adriana Salvatierra. I was able to speak with her briefly after, not last night, but the night before. There was the president of Dominicana, a number of Caribbean countries' leaders. That's an important development for listeners to pay attention to. There is a significant amount of regional solidarity for Venezuela within the Caribbean. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega also gave a speech, and he alluded to the same dynamic that you're describing now, especially with this new push to isolate Nicaragua internationally, with the Senate passing the so-called Renacer Act, effectively attempting to level a Venezuela or Cuban-style embargo on Nicaragua for what the U.S. describes as its oppressive human rights record, as their taking of political prisoners. And Ortega made the point that, the U.S. has its own political prisoners, not just, within longstanding oppressed communities, but he even alluded to the fact that after the Capitol riots, the government locked up around 400 mainly white folks as well. And he said in Nicaragua, we've only locked up 20 people. And of course, they were doing far more than what the rioters did. This wasn't just one day what happened in Nicaragua during the coup attempt in 2018. This is a multi-month development, and it was marked by kidnappings, by murder, by extortion, by rape, by serious human rights violation on the part of, who the U.S. would describe as freedom fighters.
Right.
So,
and just to make a point, Wyatt, for the Bolivia one, if Evo Morales decided to fight a coup, it would have looked something similar. Evo decided to leave. The catch is, by pushing back against the coup, you allow yourself to be painted as, oh, this person is attacking human rights because he's trying to prevent people who are trying to kill him from taking power. It's very wild. I mean, and to put it in perspective,
Exactly.
in clear terms, think of the way we talked about Bolivia. Bolivia was a clear coup. That was like the military literally takes power. Outright coup. The guy wins the election by like 10 points. We don't even have elections where people win by like 10 points like that. If Biden won by 10 points, think about what that looks like in our election. He won by like 10 points, right? And still gets taken out on the rail. You have institutions like Reuters that is acting as if questioning whether or not it's a coup. And after the coup people are taken out of office and prosecuted for crimes, what does the U.S. press do? The U.S. press looks at that in some respects and says, hey, these guys are, these potentially human rights abuses. They're putting her in prison. This is a banana court, a banana prosecution, missing the fact it was a coup. And because they never called it a coup in the first place, they can turn around and say that any prosecution for the people who were responsible for the coup is somehow a breach or a jump of the shark. It's utterly astonishing the way they talk about this stuff. I guess the point I'm making is for people who are not aware of the issues that are taking place in Nicaragua, you don't necessarily need to entirely be aware of what is taking place in Nicaragua to see what is taking place in Bolivia, a country that you could see, to get context to the way they talk about the other one. That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting. I'm sorry, Wyatt, but please continue.
Exactly. You make an excellent point, and it's certainly quite a coincidence that the U.S. seemed to have very little concern for the 40-plus indigenous and left-leaning protesters who were gunned down by the coup-born government. It's only when those who were responsible for carrying out those massacres begin to face some sort of taste of justice that the U.S. all of a sudden gets this real concern for the human rights situation. Obviously, not really a coincidence. It just shows that on some level, well, I think on a deep level, the U.S. isn't motivated by human rights, that this discourse is effectively a smokescreen for carrying out a geopolitical agenda that has to do with, first of all, the monopolization of natural resources, of oil in the case of Venezuela, of lithium in the case of Bolivia, and on the other hand, that it wants to ensure that any potentially new or any different economic model that challenges this capitalist status quo is marginalized, is destroyed, is unable to compete in the so-called free market. And I think that's really what all this is about, right? And that's what this entire bicentennial People's Congress is about. It's about on the one hand, bringing all these groups together, all these groups that are suffering under economic or even military U.S. aggression, and bringing them together. And I didn't even mention, but there, of course, have been representatives from Palestine here that have been honored on numerous occasions. There's just a lot going on here. It's basically a who's who of people who are suffering due directly to the U.S. and the European Union's aggression. And so, they want to bring that out and then to act upon that principle, of course, but then they also they want to point out these double standards by which the U.S. and, of course, the corporate media, which serves as stenographer and parrots most of these talking points coming out of the U.S. and of the EU, the massive disparity in terms of how they treat the government, depending, and of course, by extension, their people, depending on whether or not they are in agreement with their politics, and depending on whether or not those people basically agree to kneel and serve the interests of empire.
That's exactly what it is, Wyatt. 3 points. 1, hashtag taste of justice. Taste of justice needs to be a hashtag. That needs to be branded on somebody's body. I love that. I love that term. On the second point, look, I'll read the Tillerson memo. This is political. This is not me making up propaganda. The United States should use human rights as a club against adversaries like Iran, China, and North Korea while giving a pass to repressive allies like the Philippines, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Quote, allies should be treated differently and better than adversaries. Otherwise, we end up with more adversaries and fewer allies, argued the memo. This is the Tillerson memo, and this is U.S. policy. This is the most rational policy in the world for states to take on if those states are only concerned about their interests. Wyatt Reed, Sputnik analyst in Venezuela. Wyatt, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. I know it's early.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All righty. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I went along with Wyatt because I was enjoying the conversation, and I thought the conversation needed to be had because Wyatt had been there. We've been trying to get Wyatt on for a while, and I wanted to have a full-throated talk about what was going on. Not to mention, when I hear revolution, I hear pushback, and I hear resistance, and the politics of that stuff gets me riled up in general. Doesn't necessarily matter where it is even, just the whole idea of the competition and the challenge. That said, coming back to the U.S. for the moment, we have a UFO report that is expected out today that I am waited with bated breath. I am going to be on a panel later today to talk about it. Hopefully it comes out. If it doesn't, it could get pushed. So I'm going to push that for later. We even have a great professor, Loeb, astrophysicist, Harvard, who will be on to discuss science and UFOs and all that good stuff. So I'm going to push that for later. Joe Biden came up with his infrastructure package yesterday, glad-handing with Republicans, smiling and grinning with the Republicans around him that he basically mercilessly stripped down any notion of what he wanted in order to get passed. Now, there's larger politics around this because there's still a budget reconciliation package that supposedly is going to go in line with this. But it gets that much more complicated because they're saying both of these things need to go together or not at all. Because what the Democrats don't want is they get through budget reconciliation and then the Republicans say, yeah, we're not passing this either. In which case, it doesn't get passed. He made a deal with a few Republicans. And those Republicans are saying, okay, we'll agree to this $953 billion. Now, I went on my channel yesterday and I was incendiary. And I thought after the channel, I was like, is that too strong? Is that too strong? I mean, I even made allusions to the point of saying if the Capitol push was people saying 600,000 of us have died, we need health care, and you guys are passing this nonsense, then I would have been on this platform cheering, probably being cut off the air for cheering it on. But that's not what took place. It was something different. It is infuriating. For 600,000 Americans have died, and for us to be back to politics as usual. It is infuriating. The president didn't strip away the filibuster. The president didn't make that a key point in a tactical fight to get his agenda accomplished. The president wasn't willing to threaten and browbeat and cajole and to arm twist and to do whatever was necessary to get his agenda accomplished, screaming America. The president wasn't willing to do those things. And then, to make it even worse, the president comes out and gives this breathless speech yesterday. And in a speech that is supposed to be about infrastructure, he is talking about autocracy in the way that Biden likes to talk about it. This is a fight against democracy and authoritarianism. What are you talking about? This is an infrastructure bill. And not just an infrastructure bill. This is about what are you going to do for the American public? We had a bridge in D.C. fall the other day. Just fall out of the blue. Was it construction? Was it that there was no upkeep? What is the issue with investing in America? Why do you all hate Americans so much? I don't quite get that. And because I don't quite get that, when I see these guys come together with this kind of business as usual, here's a stripped down bill. Oh, let's glad hand. And Biden barely able to get words out of his mouth because it looks like he's out of breath, even though he's standing still. That's our political process. And in the context of the political process, they're telling us how awesome this is. This is like the old days of coming together, negotiation. And then he says this, and this set me off. Yes, I was already set off, but this set me off that much more. So let's play this clip.
But I really think the public understands, and they're seeing. The proof is in what's happening. It's now projected our economy is going to grow above 7% this year. Projections from Wall Street to the Fed is going to continue to grow. We're going to increase more, and guess what? Remember, you were asking me, and I'm not being critical of y'all, I really mean this. It was legitimate questions you're asking me. Asking me, well, you know, guess what? Employers can't find workers. I said, yeah, pay them more. This is an employees bargaining chip now. What's happening? They're going to have to compete and start paying hardworking people a decent wage. And by the way, talk of inflation. The overwhelming consensus is going to pop up a little bit and then go back down. No one's talking about this great, you know. So again, if it turns out that what I've done so far, what we've done so far, is a mistake, it's going to show. It's going to show the economy's not going to grow like it wasn't before. People aren't going to have jobs with increased pay like it was before. People are going to be out of work like it was before with no options. Unemployment's going to continue to climb instead of continue to go down. If that happens, then my policies didn't make a lot of sense. But I'm counting on it not. That's why counting on it is working.
To be clear, I am not against dropping $563 billion into the economy. That's the additional spending or whatever that's taking place. It does depend on how it's paid for. If these guys are putting in a gas tax in order to pay for it, meaning we're going to hit the poor, then yeah, there are going to be problems. But I'm not against the spending. And if you drop that much money into the economy, that much money in the economy will show. Clearly, it's going to show. That's not really the point, though. Why is it always lowest common denominator when it comes to the American public, especially an American public that was so dramatically let down with the number of people that died, with the businesses that were lost and everything else? But the key point here is pay them more. That's what you're telling them? As if the president of the United States has no power and capability to do anything about it. And I'm pretty sure there's somebody out there saying, well, Jamarl, Biden can't write the bill and stuff. No, but Biden did have the potential to get that over the finish line. The notion that employers will pay, they pay more when they are forced to do so and not until then. And fact of the matter is this notion that it's an employee bargaining chip, that is temporary at best. Those people who are saying, I'm going to float for a bit until I get another job, that's temporary. Those people are going to be brought back down to earth and forced back into those dead-end jobs that they were brought into before. Those dead-end jobs will get filled. Those employers will be able to fill those people eventually because those people will be grounded down by reality itself. Yes, a lot of people have left their jobs. And yes, I hope these things create more jobs. But there's always a downward pressure on the amount of money that people get paid because the employer wants to make their ends. And if there's a temporary change to that, fair enough. But I don't even believe that temporary change is necessarily going to substantiate itself over time. It's temporary. If you want employers to pay people more as president, you legislate it through law. You don't get out there and scream about it on a podium. You put it through law. You have it where you stamp it into a bill. You have a big signing ceremony. You have all of these people saying, yes, Joe Biden did this. Joe Biden increased 40 million people's wages to a livable wage, something that Joe Biden said was a starvation wage. So instead of Joe Biden passing the $15 an hour that he said he was going to pass, instead of Joe Biden passing the PRO Act that he said he was going to pass, he gets out and says, pay people more. That's an utter betrayal, and that's a failure, and call it what it is. Shane, yes, I'm greatly aggravated by stuff like this, right? I grew up in a household. Maybe I'm projecting my pain of the youth or whatever, but fair enough. It's there for that reason. I grew up in a household where a parent wasn't making $15 an hour. Single parent. Didn't have a dad there. Single parent raising a kid. And it's always borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Anything that takes place is a catastrophe and an emergency. Oh, I got a parking ticket. There's no way for me to pay this $10 parking ticket. It's that, right? If there's a school trip, that's a disaster. Now I'm embarrassed because I can't pay for my kid to go on a school trip that all of these other kids are paying. How am I going to get the money for my kid to go on that trip? All of that stuff takes place within the context of a family. And you wonder, hey, does that eat away at an individual's psyche? Yes. Yes. Does the kid recognize it eating? Yes. And you have all of these other people who are out here like, who don't quite get it. It doesn't stick in them. Does $100 million Nancy Pelosi get that? No. No. Does Joe Biden and his crackhead son get that? No. Clearly, he doesn't. Because when he had the capacity to change the lives of, 30, 40 million people, he didn't do it. And now he's standing on a podium saying, hey, you guys should pay people more. I have some choice words for Joe Biden that I can't say on the radio. And fact of the matter is, your job as president, yes, you could say you're a policy analyst and everything else. At the end of the day, though, your job is legislation. That is the capacity to which you are operating and working. Law, not preaching, not screaming at people to do what you believe that they should do. No, you put it in law. You want people to pay people more, put it in law. That's where I'm at. Yes, I'm aggravated. Hate that speech. Such a betrayal. And it's never going to be called that. Never going to be called that. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're talking about Afghanistan and the Taliban and America's imminent departure coming up on September 11th. That is when we're due out. Speaking with Scott Ritter, former whistleblower on weapons of mass destruction, UN weapons inspector, WMD whistleblower. Follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. Scott, thank you for joining us. How are you doing? Scott, you there?
Hello. Yep.
Hey. Oh, thank you for being with us. Just couldn't quite hear you there. Let's get into it. America's withdrawing from Afghanistan. As we've made that announcement, as Biden set a date, September 11th, the Taliban has increased its activity. Of course, they had been active, but really it has accelerated quite significantly. Dozens of districts, over 40 districts at this point. I think around 50 as of today. Now, Afghanistan's central government, they have taken back some of those territories. They've taken back a northern district as of the last day, but this was the day after the Taliban took four districts from, different territories, specifically in the north. So we're pulling out. We're running away practically with our tail between our legs or something like that. The Taliban is taking over effectively, and it seems like they will be the central power, not just a rival to the government, but they will be the government within 6 months, a year, or something like that after we leave. Is that the right assessment, Scott? And if so, what does that do to Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, it's unfortunately, it's probably a very correct assessment. I mean, we've had 20 years to perfect the art of nation building in Afghanistan. We went in there and made a deliberate decision in 2001 not to focus our effort on the perpetrators of 9/11, but to expand the scope and scale of our intervention to include the government of Afghanistan at the time, the Taliban, and hold them to account for what occurred. I engaged in a debate with I'm getting senile now. The gentleman who ran Afghan policy for George. During the Obama administration, did the peace deal in Yugoslavia. But he and I did a debate on the History Channel, and it was in October of 2001, and I said that the only solution for the United States is to engage with the moderate wing of the Taliban and invoke Pashtunwali, the Afghan tribal tradition of when you have a guest that you protect them, but there's a double responsibility. If the guest betrays your trust, then you must serve them up to justice. And I said, if we engage them in this way, we use the Iranians, we use the Pakistanis as the intermediaries, we can eliminate Al Qaeda's presence forever in Afghanistan without resorting to a war we simply cannot win. He disagreed. Apparently, the U.S. government disagreed, and we engaged in this process of taking over Afghanistan. For 20 years now, we've been fighting the same war year after year after year. We cycle through different generals, different officers, different units. Every unit that went into Afghanistan inherited failure, inherited a mission that had not been completed, had not been successfully executed, and they entered with the promise that we will do better, we will win, we will prevail, and they did not. For 20 years now, we've been propping up one of the most corrupt governments ever, and it's a government that's corrupt because we made it corrupt. It's a government that's corrupt because we simply propped it up with money, with artificial structures. We bribed people to be our friends. We bribed people to do things for us, but there was no heart and soul to what we did.
$3 trillion, right? If I'm the numbers right, I'm pulling up the Afghan files now from Washington Post, but it was like $3 trillion that we dropped into Afghanistan.
It's a lot of money. And $3 trillion in Afghanistan is far different than $3 trillion in the United States, meaning that it should go much further. But instead of building sustainable government, we built government that exists on pure corruption. I mean, ask yourself today, why can the Taliban go to a northern district and simply get on a megaphone and say, "We are here, surrender," and the soldiers surrender? Why would they do that? If the soldiers believed in something, because I'll tell you what, the Taliban believe. They are willing to die for their cause, and that's why they're going to win. You know who's not willing to die for their cause? The average Afghan soldier. Why? Because he doesn't believe in what he's doing. He's been conscripted in. He doesn't get paid. His officers have inflated their ranks, pocket the money, don't pay him, don't use the money they receive for his food. He gets starvation diets. They don't take care of him. And then in the end, when he's expected to stand up and fight and die for this new government, he's not going to. And they're surrendering in droves. In droves. The soldiers that do fight are the ones who are so closely linked to the United States that they know their fate is sealed if the Taliban take over. So they will fight to the death because they have no option. But for the average Afghan soldier, they're not willing to die for their cause. They're going to surrender, and that's what's happening over and over again. This brings up memories of South Vietnam in 1975. If you go back in time and look at what happened, in January, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong started an offensive. The South Vietnamese military, which, again, the United States spent nearly 20 years building up, equipping, arming to support a corrupt government, tried to fight. But in the outlying regions, the army collapsed. They collapsed in on Saigon. And in the end, they just threw down their weapons and they surrendered because there was nothing worth dying for. That's going to happen in Afghanistan. That is happening in Afghanistan right now as we speak. Biden said he wants to be out by September. The military's already said we're going to be out by July. And the point is they might have to accelerate it even further. We may run into a situation where we haven't left Afghanistan by the time the government falls. I'm not saying that's a guaranteed outcome, but when panic takes over.
Yeah, and what's screwed up to me about this, Scott, is that that seems foreseeable. The fact that the behavior that you're talking about psychologically, the unwillingness to die for the cause, which again, being willing to die for a cause is actually something that you need to achieve or establish in a human being. It doesn't come by default. Normally, we'll just sort of run away. We don't want to die. We'll try to keep ourselves safe. That kind of thing, which we should have and could have and would have foreseen, frankly, in the Taliban and in Al Qaeda and any pretty much any one of these groups that we're fighting. I don't see how we could have thought that we could build up a functioning democracy, that kind of thing, and we wouldn't have seen exactly that problem rearing its head up. And working with the already established leaders, like you're talking about, the Pashtun tribes, working with the people who currently have authority and legitimacy in the region seems like the way that you would establish something that people would fight for, because it's their families, it's their communities. You have some inroad there. Anyway, Jamarl and I were kind of going back and forth on this. I was thinking it was Richard Holbrooke you might have been talking to. You might have had the conversation with. Jamarl, who did you say you were thinking here? I
wasn't sure if it was Douglas Loeb. So looking at the document, the Washington Post, it comes up, it says right here, the czar for Afghanistan under Bush and Obama was Douglas Loeb.
Do those names, do you know who
you were debating?
Just trying to remember, Scott.
No, it was Richard Holbrooke.
Was it Richard Holbrooke? Okay.
Shane gets it.
That's what I was kind of thinking there. Very interesting. Scott, I'm going to take us into a brief break here. We're going to be coming back, continuing this conversation. You've been listening to Scott Ritter, the voice of Scott Ritter. He is a former UN weapons inspector and a WMD whistleblower. You're also listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into break, coming back with Scott on the other side. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're having this conversation about Afghanistan. The United States is on its way out, and as it's on its way out, Taliban has basically been taking districts. By the latest count, I think this is either Reuters or New York Times, actually. It's 50 districts that have taken down. Afghanistan has taken a few minor districts back, but at the end of the day, you can kind of see where this is going. There are 500 districts apparently in total, give or take. Earlier, I made the point of saying that we invested $3 trillion. It was $1 trillion that we invested, give or take, with a little bit more because that's not including money from the CIA or other institutions that are dropping money into the country. And look, I would read to you what the document, this is called Lessons Learned. It was right here, State Department and U.S. Agency for Internal Development. And this document was basically getting people to give interviews, people who were involved in the policy of Afghanistan. And you got people being very, very honest in their takes on this stuff. So right here, we were devoid of a fundamental understanding in Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. Douglas Loeb, 3-star general who served as the White House Afghan czar during Bush and Obama administrations, told the government interviewers in 2015. He added, "What are we trying to do here? We haven't the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking. If the American people understood the magnitude of this dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost," Loeb added, blaming the deaths of U.S. military personnel on bureaucratic breakdowns among Congress, the Pentagon, State Department, who will say this was in vain. That is extraordinary testimony or commentary that you, on no circumstances, would typically hear if it was allowed out in public. Meaning, if he knew that this was going to be out, he probably would have never said it. We're joined with Scott to have a conversation about Afghanistan. And more importantly, what does the Taliban want? If indeed the Taliban will take Afghanistan, and if indeed this is like Vietnam, where the American helicopter leaves the tower or leaves the roof, and we know, and everybody knows, that Vietnam is about to fall. Scott is a former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower. Scott, again, thank you for continuing to join us. Scott, what does the Taliban want? If indeed they're going to take Afghanistan, what are their objectives? And more importantly, well, let's start there first. What do the Taliban want? Once they've retained the governmental power itself or the mechanisms of government, once they take the state, what's next?
Well, remember, in order to answer that question, you got to remember how the Taliban was created in the circumstances. The Taliban was created in the aftermath of an Afghan civil war that took place following the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. You basically had warlords, reigning over and carrying out, terrorism on the Afghan people. The Taliban, is derived from the term talib, which is student, and there were in the Kandahar region. The Mullah Omar, the founder of the Taliban, was actually, running a madras, a religious institution with his students when he was approached by a family who had been stopped at a roadblock, and the children had been kidnapped by these warlords who were raping them. And so Mullah Omar and his students went to the roadblock to free the children. And in doing so, they began to realize that action needed to occur. And so these were religious people who were trying to instill Sharia law and a sense of normalcy, a sense of lawfulness under Islamic law. And they, what you found, the reason why the Talib were able to gain widespread control over Afghanistan is that the vast majority of Afghan people were desperate.
Wow.
This kind of stability. They didn't know that they were buying into, and any time when you have an organization or that embraces extremism, and in this case, extreme religiousness, there is a price to pay. And Sharia law wasn't just about peacefulness; it was about holding people to account the old-fashioned way. Women were stoned to death, limbs amputated, and the strict adherence to rules that were anti-Western were implied. It wasn't a paradise on earth, but it was 20 times better than what existed under the warlords. And so what the Taliban were trying to instill and install in Afghanistan was a caliphate, a religious government, a government that adhered to the strictures of Islam and Muhammad. It was imperfect. It probably never could be achieved, but it was their vision. And that's what they want. They want to return to a vision of an Islamic society governed by Sharia law that adheres to not only Islamic dictates, but also the Pashtunwali. Again, it's a unique blend of Islam and Pashtun tribal cultures that makes the Taliban what it is. There was a colonel, Harry Tennell, who took a brigade into Afghanistan in 2011, and he came out of that tour. And he wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Army, and he basically said, we don't know what we're doing there. He said the same thing about what you said, but
Loot.
We speak about misogyny. He said misogyny is a Pashtun tribal culture. You're not going to come in as the United States, snap your fingers and say, treat women like your equals and let them wear dresses and let them hold jobs and all this stuff. That just isn't going to happen.
But what does that look like in the context of government? I mean, because because they're not, it's Afghanistan. It's a country. And yes, legal fiction, fair enough, but it's a country. What is that culture, like you said, that Pashtun culture, this tribal tradition, what does that look like trying to run a country? You still got to keep the lights on. You still got to get the gas to the people's houses. You still got to do all of that stuff. How are they going to pull it off, and can they pull it off?
They can do that. First of all, Pashtun tribal culture is far more democratic than anything we've installed in Afghanistan. When a tribe sits down, they hold councils. They discuss. When you sit around the council, you're allowed to voice your opinion freely. You're treated with respect. You're given a time to air your grievances, and then a decision is made collectively. And then the tribal leader takes that decision to another council, a Loya Jirga. They sit down the same way. It's very democratic. It works the will of the people through the leadership up to the top. Again, it's not for me. I want to do things, but it is democracy in action, without Thomas Jefferson defining it. It's a respect for a male-dominated society where the individual has a right to be heard, and his grievances should be addressed by a leadership. The leadership doesn't have legitimacy if it doesn't handle the grievances and needs of the individual. Now, the Taliban, when they came into power, they weren't very sophisticated. So sewage systems didn't function properly. The power didn't come on, et cetera. The one thing the Taliban have learned in the last 20 years is that in order to succeed as a modern nation state under Islam, they need to be able to run power plants. They need to be able to do these things. And so we're looking at a far more sophisticated Taliban today, a far more technologically savvy Taliban today than existed back in 2001. So the nation will be, I believe, far more progressive from a technological standpoint. They still will be suppressed from a Sharia standpoint, but there is a danger here, because what we're speaking about, and when we say a technologically savvy government, we're speaking about the current moderate wing of the Taliban, the one that's handling the ongoing negotiations, et cetera. But there's a radical wing of the Taliban, and this is a radical wing that retains close links with foreign fighters, so-called Al-Qaeda fighters. And with the rapid collapse of the Afghan government, this radical wing is becoming empowered. So what we might see is, yes, we will get a Taliban victory insofar as they eliminate the Afghan government and take over, but then there will be a Taliban civil war. And so the future of Afghanistan is just going to continue to be cyclical in nature and a tragedy.
Major internal conflict between sort of more hardliners and more moderate takes. Now, this is all we've been talking about: domestic policies, domestic politics policies, culture. Adopting Western institutions and technology, and learning over the course of the last couple of decades how to run them, so you can have a sort of modern administrated state, that kind of thing. I'm looking at this from a foreign policy perspective. We're again running away effectively with our tail between our legs, or something like that. Our toe is stubbed from having kicked the can down the road so many times. We've decided to nurse it at home, and we've left this as a problem, as because the civil war, that's not just a problem for that country. It produces a lot of spillover problems for neighboring countries, and not just neighboring countries, regional powers, and the other major world powers. Afghanistan's sort of nestled in between, the peripheries of both China, which has a problem with its Uyghur population. And, clearly their problem with the Uyghur population has been made into an international problem. Anyway, Afghanistan wedged between China and Russia. And associations clearly, like you brought up, deep Soviet associations. How are those countries going to view this, and how will this, whatever, either of the hardliners or the moderates winning out, how's the Taliban, what type of entity is that going to be from a foreign policy perspective? What do you think these nations see when they see a Taliban-run Afghanistan, Scott?
Well, I mean, again, Afghanistan's become a cauldron of foreign intrigue. Iran. There's a huge Shia population in Afghanistan, and Iran has long had ties. Those ties have become stronger because of the instability. There's an Uzbek population, a Turkmen population that have links across the border into the former Soviet republics that they have an interest. India viewed. Pakistan has viewed for a long time Afghanistan as being its strategic depth in any conflict with India. And India has been working to become involved with Afghanistan, to strip away Afghanistan from its links to Pakistan, because the Pashtun population straddles both borders, and so there's Indian intrigue. And as you mentioned, China. It's not just the Uyghurs; it's Islam in general. If you go back and take a look at what was happening in the 1800s, early 1900s, you had a number of Islamic revolts in Kashgar and Western China undertaken by Islamic populations, which were motivated by the Islamic populations of Afghanistan and Central Asia. And so China has a vested interest. If the Taliban come into power, it is a victory of Islam.
It's the same in a weird way. That's the thing about the Taliban, creating a caliphate, creating an Islamic state. It's what we've been combating this entire time, and yet we set up the conditions for exactly this to happen. I'm sad to say. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower, thank you for joining us. Great conversation. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, going into a break, coming back with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Nothing is a 0 or 1, right, Shane? So you can't know you're listening to Fault Lines, but you should assume or
this is
99.99999.
It's true. It's true. No, and this is the thing. It's either okay. So nothing can be a 0 or a 1 because it's either you don't want to be completely.
It's a contradiction in terms.
You don't want to be completely certain or
Wait, but the statement is a paradox.
What's that?
The statement in and of itself is a paradox.
You can't be completely certain about anything, including whether or not you should be completely certain about 0 or 1.
Right.
But then, if you look at this from a computer's perspective, isn't everything zeros and ones tomorrow? Binary.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going
Taking
with that.
the quantum computers.
That's true.
Yeah. But I know what you mean. From the human standpoint, we're always in the dark. Always. And it's like you're feeling your way through. And we have this thing where it's as long as other people agree with you on some level, it helps you believe your world is solid. I think that's why people recoil at this notion of like wearing masks. Like Tucker Carlson goes on is like, people should take the diapers off their face. And it's like, why do you care why that guy is wearing a mask or not as he walks through the public? And is it possible that it's like, look, we need it for somebody to not agree with us on some level contradicts our world. Meaning our world is X. The way I frame the world, how it feels and everything else is a certain thing. That's what my world is.
It's true, but the thing with the mask is there's also this feeling of perceived judgment. Like, okay, the assumption that Tucker has is that people who are wearing masks, if he goes into the Whole Foods, and I'm, by the way, not wearing masks into Whole Foods anymore, like most people aren't. Interesting. These things have changed so quickly. But if I go into Whole Foods in the time where everybody's wearing a mask and I'm not, and I feel people are looking
pressure.
People are looking
pressure.
at me, and I'm looking at people, and there's it's the social pressure. Even if they're literally, I'm invisible.
Yeah,
they don't actually ever look at me or perceive me. I'm like, are they looking at me?
Why is the social pressure there? Because on some level they're saying you are doing something that you are not supposed to be doing,
and it's your own superego being like, you are doing something that you're not supposed to do.
It's
but
so
then
wild.
Then you push back against it, and you're like, no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You're wrong. Why are you wearing a diaper on your face?
But all of these things are like realities fighting one another, where you are not seeing reality in the same way that I'm seeing reality. Meaning, what we consider to be facts on the ground are not what you're considering to be facts on the ground. And as such, it's a weird contradiction in terms. It helps us on some level because we're radically in the dark. I think on some level, in a deep, deep, deep way, we know it, even if we don't necessarily acknowledge it on some level. And that comes out when people disagree in the way the world is set up. I could be wrong. But I really do think it's that reflection of that stuff that comes out in our disagreements. We are terrified because we're in the dark. And when we look at other human beings, and those human beings say, yes, we agree with this. It is this way to go in this particular direction. And we say, great. All of us are in agreement? Yes, everybody's in agreement. All right, this is the way the world is. We're great. Whether it's true or not is secondary to the point that everybody that is in agreement feels great and feels that this is a solid world. It's very strange. The guy who says, wait a minute, I think this is wrong. That guy is going to get all sorts of crap because that guy is saying something that is bucking what everybody is basically saying is reality. And by undermining our idea of reality, you're making us scared on some level in a deep, deep way.
That's why I don't trust society, Jamarl. That's why I learned to stay far, far away from society. We all buy into these collective myths. Anyway, we get headlines.
Yeah, we have headlines. We have headlines. Yeah, we have headlines. All right. In the news, about 14,707 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 355 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 11,672 cases per day, a decrease of 19% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 46% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 54% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 33,566,522 people across the United States, a country that does not have universal health care, and has killed 602,917 people. They will have to pay for funerals in a country where, before COVID, 42% made less than $18,000 a year. Great. Biden said that he and a bipartisan group has come up with less than $1.2 trillion infrastructure package. Yes. Miami officials say they're still looking for 100 people who may have been in a 12-story building when it collapsed during a fire. 4 people have been found dead so far. 3 were found this morning. Sounds have been heard from beneath the rubble. Rudy Giuliani's law license has been suspended in New York State after an appeals court ruled that he made false and misleading statements while trying to sway a court over Trump's failure in last election. Leaders at an EU summit in Brussels have not come to an agreement over whether or not to reopen talks with Vladimir Putin and Russia, which were suspended following the referendum in Crimea during the Euromaidan over 7 years ago. The Ethiopian military has denied that a military plane that crashed into the Tigray region was shot down by rebels, which the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front has claimed, with the Ethiopian government claiming that the plane was suffering from mechanical difficulties. A new port has been opened in Somaliland, a self-declared republic in the Horn of Africa widely recognized as part of Somalia. The port may be a benefit to the neighboring landlocked nation of Ethiopia. A security expert has been appointed to the second most powerful job in Hong Kong, deputy to the chief executive, Carrie Lam. Roman Protasevich, the dissident Belarusian journalist pulled from the Ryanair plane, was forced out of the sky by Belarusian government in an international incident, has been moved into house arrest. Defense officials in Afghanistan say they've taken a northern district in Afghanistan that was recently taken by the Taliban. The Taliban has seized dozens of districts in the past few months. There are roughly 500 districts in total, according to the New York Times, and the Taliban has taken 50 or more. A UN mandate allowing a supply of aid across the Turkish border into northwest Syria is about to run out, leaving the state of that aid in question. We're sadly only hearing about the aid because that's rebel-held territory. And last, scientists in Israel say they discovered remnants of a previously unknown species of early humans while studying fossilized fragments of a skull and chin discovered in Israel. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So I want to talk about Britney Spears. Britney Spears wasn't part of our headlines, and this was brought to my attention yesterday. It is Britney Spears, so all things being equal, this is not necessarily something that would have been brought to my attention. By the same token, the story is heartbreaking. I don't know how many people who listen to this, meaning I don't know the ages. And so maybe the 20-somethings or the young people, and maybe I'm, being too flattering of the channel and who I think is listening to the channel. But on the side of erring on the side of optimism, for the young people out there, Britney Spears was a huge celebrity at like 16. I mean, maybe even younger. And, Hit Me Baby One More Time and all of this other stuff. And the videos and her claim to fame back then was she was a child, 15, 16, doing these very exotic moves and wearing very short, skimpy things. And it was this kind of weird thing like, whoa, is that okay? Which gives buzz, gives all sorts of limelight, and she had a good album. And so you have this kind of mix of thing, all of the celebrity around this child for all intents and purposes, and that child grows up and perpetuates in that. Now, I was 17 when I hit kidney failure, and I went to college at 17. And between sex, drugs, and staying up late at nights, there was not much education going on. There was, but not in the way from schooling. And I went out of whack big time. I ended up in the hospital over and over again because of my own behavior, because it's a 17-year-old dealing with a major medical issue. Meaning, children don't necessarily deal with those things well. Those kids are left to their own devices. What if it's not a medical thing? What if it's, hey, here's a ton of money. Here's a ton of media attention. Here's all of these people trying to find any and every story about you to make you look bad as a child. All of these people saying bad things about you. All of these people saying good things about you. People screaming in the video, Harley, bring it down. All of that. That's your world. What does it look like to a 16-year-old? And how does a 16-year-old perpetuate themselves through that? And can they navigate that in the most efficient way? Now, you would have people on the sidelines, oh, Britney should have did this and I would have did that. And I say, you people are idiots. I don't think you would have did anything. The fact that you would have done exactly what she did is because she did that. And if you were given all of the variables and everything else, you would have did exactly what she did because she did that. Those variables were there. I'm making the point that Britney has had a difficult life on some respect. And that life has been apparently quite hellish recently, with her being stuck in this kind of weird slavery of a conservatorship that she's been stuck with. Shane, I know you've seen this. We were talking about this earlier today. And like I said, this is not necessarily a story I would see because, you know, I do like news, politics. That's the stuff that gets me, right? But I also have a heart. I also remember who she was. I am also empathetic to the plight of somebody who ends up in this subjugated, de facto subjugation by people who have their own ends and their own wants that don't necessarily coincide with her own. She has basically been incapable of living her life despite the fact that she is a grown woman. It is very bizarre. I was trying to pull up the testimony.
I've got some of it here.
Oh, go for it. Yeah, read the testimony, please.
Well, okay, I can, but there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
If you look, there's like
the
a
part where she gets into like...
No, totally.
Yeah.
I had stuff to say too that I wanted to get into, but then there was, there are some quotes that I was going to go into from it. But a couple of things. You said she started when she was 16. Technically, I believe her career started when she was 11. I was just, looking this up.
I just remember when she hit big, like when she did her video, first video.
But I think it makes sense to set it up. She was a child star. She started when she was 11. She was on like a Mickey Mouse show or the Disney Club when she was 12. She was with that for years. Then she blew up. And like you're saying, 16, released her own album, got onto a label, became a major independent music star. Thing is, through this time, her parents, as many parents of child stars do, were acting as, her managers and in that sort of custodial role. Now, skip forward years, she becomes a success. She starts to have some mental problems. Those are, they go along with the child stardom.
Yes. Yeah.
2008, she has the famous mental break. And this conservatorship starts where basically her father specifically and this team are given almost like you can think of it almost like an estate or something like this. They're given a sort of executive role in determining what's best for this person. And this is what she hits on constantly in her testimony from the beginning of it to the end. And this is not all of her testimony. This is what's been leaked. You can listen to it on YouTube. Anyway, they work for her. She is the star. She works constantly from what she says. And I believe her. That's how she got there. She works constantly. They work for her, ultimately. And yet, they have ultimate control over her. Right. And if you read some of the stuff that she's saying in there about the IUD, how they have her sign a contract where she can't have any kids, and they're forcing her from having kids. She repeatedly says, and this is, remember when the other day I was saying, it's creepy when somebody says, I deserve a right to life or something like that. And I get it. Why me saying that is itself a little bit like, what are you actually saying there? But with Britney Spears, when she's saying, I just want to ride in my boyfriend's car. And she says that repeatedly. Yeah. Who is stopping her from riding in her boyfriend's car?
Weird.
How old is she?
Yeah.
She's a success.
She's 39 years old.
She could be the absolute biggest dumpster fire. She could have been a complete musical failure. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Let her ride with her boyfriend in his car. That's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so the kinds of things that she says when I see this being written about, she's, it's often she's traumatized. I think she uses that word herself. And that I think is the right word to use. Yes. She is very clearly showing signs of emotional trauma, high level trauma from what is effectively a slavery relationship. When we were talking about this yesterday and the word slavery was used, I was like, okay, I've heard about
is
this.
That too strong?
I remember,
that type of stuff.
I remember there being something with her dad where like, okay, I knew the loose outlines of the story. I didn't know the word conservatorship applied until I got back into reading about this. Anyway, look into it. Yes, it does apply. You have all these people who for more than a decade now have been able to force this person to do whatever they want. Now, setting the stage for all this, or like taking a step back for a second, why should you care? Why do I care? One reason I think it makes sense to care in a weird way, this is possible in our society. This has legally been possible. And she is kind of, you can tell, pulling her hair out, going insane. She's described to the courts a couple of years ago the kind of behavior that she's experienced, this kind of controlling behavior where she effectively does not have certain rights. They didn't act on it. Why is that possible in our society? You see what I'm saying, right? Yeah. It's almost a legal thing, but it's this. If you detach it from her as a single person, which I don't want to do completely, but take a step back. Why do we allow this? Why is the state of California allowing this? Why has this happened? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's the larger question that hopefully this raises, and hopefully she's personally able to get out of this situation, but also hopefully something changes here because this is screwed up.
I mean, they're forcing her to take drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Put that in perspective.
That's the other part, yeah.
They forced her to take lithium. She said they put me on lithium out of the blue, and if I said no, at that point they're saying, oh, she's being non-compliant.
Exactly. If she's not doing the dance moves the way they want her to, if she disagrees with some of their creative choices in terms of her music, they say, oh, they go to her therapist. That's what she's saying. They go to her therapist. They tell her therapist, oh, she's not taking her drugs. She's been skipping her drugs. She says that she has nurses who are constantly at home with her verifying that she's taking her drugs. So this is a lie from their end, from what she's saying. They go to her therapist, and their therapist, without her permission, puts her on lithium.
Right. She said just out of the blue.
Out of the blue.
And I mean, think of it. If it was you, like, think about what that means. And it's like, oh, well, she had mental problems. So what?
Yeah.
So what? I mean, again, I make the point of, like, she's a child star. And at 16, 17, I mean, like you say, even at like 12, this kid has basically been not to herself.
Yeah.
And had to deal with all of Austin. Just backstory, when he came on the show, one of the things he was like, people are talking bad about me. That's like 100 people. That's like nobody.
Are you talking about the YouTube chat room?
Yeah, it's just the chat room. Think about that to the tune of millions of people. Like, it's just really extreme in regards to what it does to self and the individual itself. And so, yeah, I'm not shocked by that. By the same token, she's an adult.
Hey, it's true.
And the idea that you're forcing this person to take lithium, and this is a very bizarre case. So, yeah, she said she didn't know that she could petition in the conservatorship.
Yeah.
And so, at this point now, she's doing so. So, yeah, the story is very wild, man. Definitely take a look at it. But let's end this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with a very interesting guest. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging the content or digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with the chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Packed into a $2.3 billion omnibus spending bill and coronavirus relief package in December was a stipulation requiring the Department of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence to deliver an unclassified report on unidentified flying objects to Congress within 6 months. That is today. That is today. We are awaiting this report on UFOs with bated breath. And it's not so much that the report is going to tell us aliens exist. There's no expectation of that. In fact, we're not quite sure what the report is going to say beyond this notion of something in our skies. We don't know what it is. We don't believe it's us, meaning from the standpoint of the U.S. government and our secret tech and our secret military. That's all we're going to get. And maybe that push further investigations and so forth. But that's what this report on some level is going to be. However, the report has spurred a massive amount of interest. And in and of itself, that's a positive. And hopefully that will spur further investigations to figure out what it is, because the idea that you're leaving alone, there's something in our skies, flying in our technical airspace and our militaristic institutions, we don't necessarily know what they are. Some of these things are doing fantabulous things that we aren't quite sure how they do what they do. However, we're just going to ignore that and just move on. That seems unsatisfying and seems it's not going to be the case. Joining us today is a guest that I am so excited to speak with, Professor Avi Loeb. Professor Avi Loeb is received a PhD in plasma physics at the age of 24 from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, was subsequently a long-term member of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he worked in theoretical astrophysics. In 1993, he moved to Harvard University, where he was tenured 3 years later. He is now Frank B. Bard Jr. Professor of Science and former chair of the department. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to get into science's role in the study of this topic, because it's strange phenomena. We have data, even though a lot of that data is classified, meaning they're not going to necessarily give us, let's say, images or, let's say, radiolithic data. There's certain things that they may be able to pull in that they may not necessarily give to the public that is still there that they can study and analyze. How does science go about studying this? And maybe the question, before I get to that question, maybe I should, let's start there. How should science approach this?
Yeah, so science is based on evidence, and when evidence seems intriguing, it doesn't need to be conclusive. It should drive scientists to get more evidence to figure out what stands behind the intriguing facts. And I think we reached the point where, once we see the report, if indeed the leaks that we heard are accurate, that it will be said that there are some objects that are definitely real. UFOs in general may be a mixed bag. You can't believe every eyewitness testimony that we heard in the past, but it's sufficient to have one.
Yeah, I only knew one. I only knew one. They can tell me that every last thing, the overwhelming majority of these was swamp gas. And I was like, okay, I just need one.
Yeah. Only one. The point is, people that claim that they saw something unusual may feel vindicated, but it doesn't say anything about the other reports. My point is, if it looks intriguing, if it looks like some of the objects are real, and on the other hand, we cannot really understand how they behave because it exceeds the limits of our technologies. And frankly, we probably know pretty well the limits of other nations' technology, because otherwise there would be the fingerprints of those technologies either in the consumer market, because one can make a huge profit if the technologies were far more advanced, or we would see it in the battlefield. But I have a hard time imagining that Russia or China have technologies that we don't know about, that far exceed what the U.S. has.
And it's how far they exceed our capabilities that would truly boggle the mind. And I roll to disbelieve on this one. Can you give us a sense from a physical perspective, just understanding the science here, looking at the behavior that has been described by the eyewitness testimonies and that you can see in some of the videos here?
Let's go with the Nimitz. Let's be specific.
Yeah, we can take the Nimitz. I was thinking the gimbal video, but there are a couple different examples.
Because the Nimitz is the one that I think is the hardest to dismiss. Like, that's the one that Frank West says, I have a hard time dismissing that. If Frank West has a hard time dismissing it, I'm going to go with that one.
Good. That's the standard.
That's the one.
So I'm just curious, what's scientifically required here? Describing the phenomena that you see here in the technologies that would be required. How far in advance are we, and what would we need to discover? How would the universe need to work? Is another way of asking the question. Avi Loeb.
Right. So first thing, is in order to believe that something is real, in order for us to think that it's not an illusion or a smudge on the camera, you want multiple people from different angles, and at least some of the objects appear to, be in that category. So that's why we should do further investigations. And the way to proceed is basically, the reason that the data is classified, much of the data, and we are seeing only the tip of the iceberg, is because it was collected by military equipment, by sensors that are classified. And obviously, for national security reasons, we don't want to expose our capabilities in monitoring the sky. But the next step would be to have a scientific experiment where you take off-the-shelf cameras that are far more advanced now than they used to be a decade ago or 2 decades ago, and we place them in the same locations or other locations and monitor the sky. And what you want to see as a scientist is, I want to see side effects. For example, if there is an object moving faster than sound, it's called hypersonic, just moving faster than sound, and we know that there are such objects, for example, supersonic jet planes, move faster than sound. There should be a shock wave produced in air when you have such an object moving faster than sound, and you should hear a sonic boom. There should be some side effects that one can look for, and by that verify that it's a real object moving very fast. Another thing is if it moves through water, you should see a splash. There are all kinds of things that you can look for as a scientist that a military person might not be thinking about. Obviously, my point is it should move from the realm of talking points of politicians and national security advisors to the realm of science, where you collect evidence, and the evidence would be open to the public. It will be open data. We will all know what kind of instruments are being used, and then the data will be analyzed, and we will figure out the nature of these things. We're in the 21st century, so we're not in the dark ages where people would have miracles, that you would have to believe in something. We have modern science that, if these are real objects, can identify the nature of these objects, and that's the way we should proceed. And otherwise, we leave it up to speculation for the public, and it's an unhealthy situation. Scientists should be attending to the public's interest.
Agreed. Absolutely agree. 1,000% agree with you. Why are they not? Why are they not? Because look, for me, for my assessment, and correct me if I'm wrong, science is observation. It's very specific, very detailed, experimentation and observation. And I've tried to invite scientists on the show to talk about this. They've said, yeah, I don't buy it. I think it's nonsense. And I made the point to them, are you serious? It's like, how do you blow off all of the data that has been coming out by itself? We would have to believe that everybody in the Pentagon are idiots. Just saying, right? Because, like you said, all I'm saying is it's like the data is voluminous, and whether we can explain it or not is secondary to the point that it's there. It's a there. And so it's like that there can't be ignored. The there has to be explained. And the people who are supposed to explain our world and our universe for the last 30, 40, 50 years have basically said it's swamp gas. There's no there.
There's this huge stigma around it.
Yeah.
Why?
And it's like science should be curious. That should be like that. It's like, whoa, is there something there or not? And are all of these people just delusional? And now all of the information is coming out, and it becomes like, okay, you have very clear cases of military pilots saying, I'm seeing stuff. You have them explaining it, describing it. You have people who are being paid billions of dollars, like in regards to their training and everything else. Fravor, if I'm not mistaken, was on 9/11 flying around the country protecting America. And so it's like multiple angles, like all of this stuff. So it seems that it became almost a religious thing for science to not be interested in this. Am I wrong in that? Am I being too harsh?
Yeah. No, you're not too harsh. I had the Scientific American essay.
I saw it. I'm reading it right now. I read it as I was riding over here. And I just want to point people. Professor Avi Loeb, he's in Scientific America, June 24th, 2021. What can we learn from studying UFOs? Please read this article. This is a very good article.
And another article today, too.
Yes.
On Oumuamua.
Yeah, I wanted to say it's actually a previous essay that I had on Scientific American where I made a comparison between scientific dogma and religious orthodoxy. And just as you said, and first of all, I wanted to tell you that it's not all scientists. Here you have one speaking to you right now who is not in that club. And I do believe that the purpose of science is to clear things up, and rather than have a prejudice and say, I know the answer in advance. Because, we've seen that movie when philosophers refused to look through Galileo's telescope and said, we know that the sun moves around the earth. Obviously, we see it in the sky moving around. So it just illustrates to you how science could be trapped in prejudice. And, in this case, since the public is so curious about it, I think it's an obligation of scientists to have this kind of an experiment. And, I'll be glad to lead it. I'll be glad to be engaged in it if the funding is secure.
I want to move to Oumuamua for a second here. This is, first of all, am I pronouncing that right? This is a notoriously difficult pronunciation. Is it Oumuamua, the asteroid?
Oumuamua. Yes.
Oumuamua. Okay, I can go on that one. Oumuamua. This is the asteroid that came through, our visible space a couple of years ago. Weird behavior, tumbling through space, and not the normal spherical shape, but sort of elongated shape that we're still, we haven't exactly estimated yet. And you have been one of the more prominent people speculating that this was not a natural entity. I don't know how else to put it, that there was something strange going on here, that, aliens, something like that. Something about solar sails and the nature of the travel. What's your claim there? Can you briefly refresh people on the asteroid, when we saw it, the details about its composition, what was interesting about it, and then why do you think that there's something more there? What's your case here, Avi?
Right. So I described this object and everything around it in my new book, Extraterrestrial. And basically, it's the first object that we've seen from outside the solar system that came in the vicinity of Earth. It moved too fast to be bound to the sun, so clearly it came from outside. And at first, astronomers said, it's just a rock, just like the rocks we've seen in the solar system, just from another star. But then it didn't look like a comet or an asteroid. It didn't have gas or dust around it to a very tight limit, so it couldn't be a comet. A comet is visually clear. That you can tell. So then they said, okay, well, maybe it's a rock, just a piece of rock. But the problem is that when it reflected sunlight, as it tumbled every 8 hours, the amount of light that it reflected changed by a factor of 10, and that meant a very extreme shape, most likely pancake-like, flat shape. And then it showed also an excess push away from the sun, which is very puzzling given that nothing evaporates from it, so nothing is giving it a push, no rocket effect. And the only explanation that I could think of was reflection of sunlight. And in fact, we have seen an object that reflected sunlight and therefore was pushed from the sun without a cometary tail in September 2020.
So wait, I want to pause on this for a second. When you're talking about a push, you're talking about the rate of just its velocity, or just how fast it's traveling away from the sun. Now, one thing comes to mind for me. Couldn't that be caused by sort of a slingshot, where if it's coming from very far away and it gets pulled briefly into the gravity well and it slingshots around the sun? I know enough about sci-fi. Clearly, I'm a layperson, but I know enough about sci-fi that kind of thing happens. Couldn't it be a conventional explanation like that, for instance? And then coming back to the idea that it's acting like a solar sail, this would have to do with it being shaped sort of like a pancake, right? If it's capturing energy, if it's sort of tumbling but also traveling, photons are hitting it on its sort of flat side and they're pushing it. Is that basically the case here, Avi?
Yeah, so first, the force of gravity is well understood since the days of Newton.
Yes.
And we can calculate accurately how the object should move. Every object in the solar system moves according to Newton's law of gravity extremely precisely, to a very high precision. In fact, now we have Einstein's theory of gravity, which allows you to get to even better precision. But beyond that force, which we know how to calculate very precisely, there was something else pushing it. The force of gravity is attractive, actually. It attracts it to the sun. So taking the force of gravity out of the equation, whatever is left should be due to another force, and it couldn't be understood. I mean, one effect could be the rocket effect, just like in a jet plane when it throws gas one way and it gets pushed the other way. So that is called the rocket effect, and that's how we launch rockets. But for that, you need material to evaporate. Right. To come out from the object. And in this case, you needed about a tenth 10% of the mass of this object, which was the size of a football field, to get evaporated in order to give the push that we have seen, the excessive push. So the only other force that I could think of is reflection of sunlight. But for that, the object needs to be very thin, just like a sail. And nature doesn't make very thin objects like that. So that's what led me to propose that. And then, as I said, in September 2020, there was another object discovered by the same telescope called 2020 SO, and it was pushed from the sun by reflecting sunlight with no cometary tail. And then the astronomers that discovered it with the same telescope realized that it actually came from Earth in 1966, a rocket booster that was launched.
Really?
Interesting.
It had very thin walls, and that's why it had a large area for its mass. So I'm not saying that Oumuamua was necessarily a light sail, because 2020 SO was designed to be a rocket booster. It just needs to have thin walls. And in fact, in my Scientific American article, the recent one about connecting Oumuamua with UAP, I suggested that maybe this flat, thin shape was not that of a light sail, but was actually of a receiver. So if there were probes sprinkled on Earth long ago, and this object could have passed near us just to collect the data, to collect the information, and that they transmitted to it. And that could be another purpose for it. In fact, there are other puzzles about this object. If you assume that there are lots of these objects moving around in random directions, you find that there should be a quadrillion such objects. Huge number, much more than expected for rocks or for any other reasonable population of objects. And if it had a purpose, if it wanted to visit the inner region of the solar system, then of course you don't need as many. And so that's another reason to think maybe it had a purpose.
So you're thinking of this in the context, okay, what would an ancient civilization, meaning like remnants in a sense, in the way that this stuff is kind of just floating through our cosmos. I think the thing is, we assume we're alone in a weird way as a planet, despite the fact we have SETI. And yet SETI also, with some weird way, assumes we're alone. Because, I mean, yes, it's putting out the radio waves and everything else, but they don't agree with this notion that, hey, something could potentially have visited. That just seems like off the table as one of the estimates of conversation. And maybe it shouldn't be off the table as an estimate if you're a scientist. I mean, maybe that stuff should be open on some level of, like, we don't know, and accept the fact that we don't know and leave it as a unknown, if that makes sense, as opposed to just kind of a negative in an assessment on that. How would you set up an experiment for this? Because if you were SETI, if you were having a conversation with SETI and look, there's a potential that there is something visiting us, and there's potential evidence out there for it. We don't know one way or the other. We need to set up an experiment. And in the context of an experiment, we need that experiment to give us data for phenomena that is typically reproducible. Meaning, like, some of the experimentation is somewhat difficult just because you're not going to get this kind of reproducibility of experiment or of thing over and over again, especially not within this particular area. How would you go about setting up some kind of experimentation to declare one way or the other that, yes, this is real phenomena? And then from that point on, back your way up into the point of saying it's not us definitively, as opposed to you don't believe it's us.
That's an excellent question. So I think we have been doing SETI the wrong way for 70 years, which was look for radio signals. And that's just like trying to have a phone conversation. You need the counterpart to be alive. A much better approach is to look for relics. I mean, if there are lots of civilizations that predated us billions of years ago, they might be dead by now. They might not be around, but we could still search for the relics they left behind. And so my point is, I call that space archaeology. Basically, continue to search the sky for weird objects like Oumuamua that do not behave like a comet or an asteroid, and then come from outside the solar system. And then when one of them shows up early enough before it approaches us, we can send a spacecraft equipped with a camera that intercepts its trajectory and comes close enough to it to take a close-up photograph. And, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book.
So basically find anomalies and then watch them, detect them. Jamarl, you were going somewhere.
No, just take a photo. I mean, if you know, there was this mission OSIRIS-REx that landed on the asteroid Bennu recently, and in fact took a sample that will be returned to Earth in 2023. And we can imagine a similar experiment on an artificial object. Imagine landing on it, reading off the label, made on planet X.
No, I understand, but to be more specific, I'm saying that the scientific hypothesis should change. Period. Full stop. And what I mean is, if science does experimentation and everything else, it typically starts with a hypothesis. The hypothesis right now from the majority of science is this stuff isn't real, this stuff is swamp gas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the investigation, et cetera, the assumptions that go along with it follow. That's not science, that's religion. You can make an hypothesis also of saying, look, there are things in our skies we don't know what they are. Let's assume for the moment that they're not us. Or better yet, let's just assume for the moment that we're not alone in the universe and go from there. And you can have experimentation on Earth. You can have experimentation in regards to objects that might be artifacts in space and everything else. I mean, that goes with, one, a government that is going to be honest about the experimentation and the investigation, et cetera. But assuming that for the moment, it seems that that will be the most logical part of it. I don't see why people assume that other civilizations can't get here, nor do I assume that those civilizations are dead and in the past. Or for that matter, some even assume they don't exist at all. Like, I don't understand those assumptions.
No, I completely. By the way, I rest my case. You said exactly what I keep saying, and we have actually evidence that half of the stars, like the sun, have a planet roughly the size of the Earth and roughly at the same separation. So conditions are similar to what we find on Earth in tens of billions of other Earth-Sun systems in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And there are a trillion galaxies like the Milky Way in the universe. So if you just think about it, we are not privileged. And the starting assumption should be that we are not alone, because, why should we be unique and special if the circumstances that we encounter in our backyard are so common? So that I think the starting position should be, let's assume that things like us existed in the past, exist right now, and let's just search for the things they left behind. I mean, that is the obvious, commonsensical thing to do, and not have a prejudice, not close the curtains on our windows and say we don't have neighbors. Of course, if you don't look through the window, you might be illusioned that you don't have neighbors, but it will not change the fact whether you have neighbors or not if you look or not look through your windows. For us to have a better sense of reality, we do need to look at the facts without prejudice. And I've been saying that for a long time, and I completely agree with you on that.
What happens to science? Now, this report is not going to come on and say, we're not alone. It's not going to do that. I do think the report is going to push for some kind of congressional investigation, because honestly, if you create a report that basically tells you the exact same thing that you knew prior, you're not going to get what you want out of it. And I feel like we're being managed in the way that this information is coming out, because I think you're right. Logically speaking, there are scientists who are working with the government. Those scientists and the people who are in the background can see classified and detailed information. And these guys are putting out this stuff in this kind of weird, like, drip way. It seems like they would know one way or the other whether or not it's us or not, considering they know the capabilities of the foreign countries.
Yeah, but you have to understand, there is a lot of wealth right now in the private sector, and we don't need to be in the hands of the government or in the hands of politicians or people that have access to some instrumentation.
Wait, Avi, real quick. I hate to interrupt, but there's one thing I want to get to, and I shouldn't have given that long lead in. What is science? What happens to science if it is confirmed it's not us? Like, what does it look like? What's the paradigm shift? Like, what's the first year of the paradigm shift, the moment that it's declared it's not us?
Well, for me, it's getting as much evidence as possible about what the nature of these things is, trying to learn from nature, not trying to assume what these things are.
Right.
Then, of course, there is a policy issue, how to interact with these things. It might well be that we need our artificial intelligence systems to help us in interpreting those devices, those strange objects, because it's just like having kids help you understand the content on the internet because your computer skills are not as good as theirs. So if we have AI systems, they might help us. They might help us crack down the meaning of the signals we get or what we are trying to make of the evidence we have. But my point is, let's be guided by evidence. It's really the way for us to learn things we don't know. And we are not in the hands of politicians. I mean, there are lots of people with enough money to support such an experiment. The sky is not classified. We can look at the sky. Anyone can look at the sky, and we just need to collect the data in a way that does not rely on military equipment or government-sponsored sensors. That's all. And we can do that. So rather than argue forever about what the government is releasing or not releasing, let's collect the data in a scientific experiment and figure it out ourselves.
You know what? I think you're right. I'm sitting here thinking, is that possible? Look, there are all sorts of universities all across the United States or all across the world with this level of interest. I would hope that scientists hear what you're saying and saying, yeah, these guys are right. We do need to do experimentation. We do need to figure out what this is. We do need to do our jobs.
I should tell you that there are a number of wealthy people circling around me right now. So if we can get this going, we can do the experiments.
And please come back on and tell us when that takes place.
Good luck with it.
I know, right? The voice that you guys are listening to is Professor Avi Loeb. He received a PhD in plasma physics at the age of 24 from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and was subsequently a long-term member at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, where he started to work in theoretical astrophysics. In 1993, he moved to Harvard University, where he was tenured. 3 years later, he is now Frank B. Bard Jr., Professor of Science and former chair of the department. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, working on getting our guest in, but we can pick up the conversation ourselves. Jamarl.
Yes.
Want to get into it?
Sure. We can get into it.
All right, we got the infrastructure bill. We're going to be talking with Joel Siegel.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about Joe Manchin, the infrastructure bill, bipartisanship, also Kamala Harris and the changing messaging on the border here as she's planning a trip to Mexico. Anyway.
It is funny to me that Joe Manchin gets this much attention. I think I've said this before. I want to be Joe Manchin when I grow up in a weird way. If you think about it, think of what it takes to do that. Just think about it for the moment. It just takes gumption, the ability to say, I'm going to do it. And people are like, well, whoa, you're not concerned that people are going to talk to you, just talk bad to you? They're going to say bad things? Nope, I am not. And what happens is he gets power. Power is where people think power resides. And so from the standpoint of all of these other people, despite the fact Joe Manchin is just one man, if Joe Manchin says, then he goes through. If Joe Manchin, it doesn't. And now, what does that do from the standpoint of the people around you in the room? If you're a Kristen Sinema for the moment, if you're one of these other senators, what do you think when everybody wants to know when Joe Manchin farts? You get a little bitter about that. And so there's this clip where Kristen Sinema is basically like, yeah, some people get X amount of time, but Joe Manchin, he takes the time frame, meaning he's the guy who's going to be in the spotlight. So we have right here, Sahil Kapoor, Joe Manchin expresses openness to a major reconciliation bill, echo Biden's on his human infrastructure, says the size and the scope to be determined, but doesn't draw a red line, wants to unwind Trump's tax cuts, and says the 2017 tax law was tilted to the rich. Now, it is shocking on some level for Joe Manchin to say it, which is the only reason why they're printing it, because if it was the most normal thing for Joe Manchin to say, they wouldn't print it. Nobody prints AOC saying, hey, we should raise $15 an hour minimum wage, because everybody knows that AOC is for that. No, nobody knew whether or not Joe Manchin was going to back Biden on that stuff. And what probably is happening is Joe Manchin is being called to the White House and is being talked to by Biden. I need you to back me. I need you to back me, Joe. We both have the same name. I'm Joe Manchin. You're Joe Biden. Help me. It's probably that. And so he's probably pushing him saying, look, I need you to help me with the bill. I need you to help me with the bill, which is sad on some level. Why do you have to fight this hard to get this modest of a thing done?
But I thought Biden wanted Manchin to do this. That's the thing. Is he going up there and is he desperate, or is he satisfied with this?
No, I think on some level, I do think on some level Biden has an idea of what he wants to get accomplished. I think that was even too much for Manchin. Think about, to me, it just blows me away. 600,000 Americans have died, and these guys are quibbling over the bits of this stuff. By my assessment of politics, and maybe my assessment of politics is wrong, that number of people would be used to justify everything that I would be doing for the next 4 years. And everything that I am doing that is brutish, everything that I say that is mean, everything that I say that tries to undermine or cut down one of my political opposition would be cut in terms of 600,000 Americans have died. I'm doing this for America.
I don't want to repeat myself too much, but Biden's presidency was not set up to be a big game changer.
Unfortunately, no.
His messaging was not originally, I'm going to be an FDR.
Yeah.
His messaging was, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be the opposite of Trump. I'm going to undo all the craziness that Trump brought, and I'm going to stabilize our country and make it a friendly place again, where we're no longer fighting in the streets as we were all last summer.
But you would agree with me that even in that messaging, he did say, I'm going to pass $4 trillion of this. I'm going to pass this particular plan. Meaning he had an idea of policy that he was going to pass.
Well, he was in the basement. And whatever
you get my point.
Whatever politicians say during the primaries is whatever they say during the primaries. The pivot
this is even after the primaries. So that's kind of the point
That's what I'm saying. The messaging shift was a pivot. And I don't know who made that decision, but it was after he became president, multiple months into his presidency, just a couple months ago at this point, maybe three months ago, something like that, where he started to, after the COVID bill, there was a kind of lull because there'd been all this fracas over who would get what in whatever COVID bill got released, whether it was Trump and then Pelosi was stopping it, and what were the stimulus payments going to be. And then Biden relatively quickly had a success, his first and probably only success legislatively on a big level, where he got the COVID bill through. And then it's like, okay, what's next? There was a lull. I remember going on the backstory with Lee and John. Yeah. And John, I think Lee was out at the time. John asked me, what's coming next? Okay, Biden has this COVID bill through. And I guessed correctly, I think next is going to be immigration. Yeah. But there was a question. And what happened was, into that silence, you had the immigration problem, the crisis at our border. That was getting a lot of media attention for a couple of weeks. Right. And it was at that moment that these bigger bills started to go through. People were waiting for Biden to talk. Biden gave his big address, his sort of State of the Union, quasi-State of the Union. He gave even bigger bills. It was into that lull that Biden or somebody on his team, whatever group, decided it was the right moment to make him the neo-FDR. Now, that is a messaging failure because they didn't have the votes for it. They should have known that Manchin would not have thrown himself behind what they would have needed to throw himself behind to get this stuff through. And Biden lacks the fortitude to make any real difference.
Yeah, I disagree.
Can't force Manchin.
So what I think, from my framing of the world, is that when Biden got in office, I agree with you that he was not going to be this transformative president. Agreed. And if you remember, a lot of the messaging beginning was transition president. Like he was going to be the guy who settles America and transitions into something else. So yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean, and maybe I'm more cynical on it because it's a transition president means you're literally just there to give it to somebody else, which is just weird in and of itself. It's like, well, why do I need a transition? Why don't I just vote the guy in who I actually want? Who are you transitioning to? And why not just give it to that person? But of course, you can't do that because if that person is Kamala Harris, that person can't get elected on their own. That person needs to be wedged into the White House in order to have the chance to be transitioned into.
Well, and if that person is Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard, then they're probably going to be a bit too disagreeable for you. And so you as a DNC insider don't want them out there.
You don't want them there.
And so you need to clear house. And
you don't want them there.
You field a bunch of candidates in the primaries, you see where they go, but you didn't get to your disagreement. Where do you disagree with me, Jamarl?
And keep in mind, Biden was the only person to stop Sanders. There was nobody else to stop Sanders. Think of anybody else that was in that field. Sanders was going to take it with blacks. He was going to take it with Hispanics. He was going to take it with the rest of the youth demographic. Biden was the guy that gets the blacks. We need somebody who sops up blacks like potato salad and gravy or whatever else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was the guy. And so there was nobody else. So there's that. No, my disagreement comes in with there was a messaging shift that's true, but the policy was going to be the policy regardless. Meaning Biden was never going to come in and give this kind of, I keep saying business as usual, but he was never going to come in and lowball it. He was always going to come in and go higher than Obama because they believe Obama failed. They believe when Obama came in with a stimulus, it wasn't enough. And because it wasn't enough, this was one of those things that allowed this kind of breakdown or not giving enough to the public and that type of stuff. It was widely reported. So, it's not just me saying it. In the context of them believing it failed, yeah, he was always going to go high. Now, especially after COVID, that's the other point. And so I guess I could agree with the messaging shift, but the policy was going to be the policy regardless. My thing is they gut the policies. And this belief, and by the way, also, he did have the power to do those things. Yes, I know you're saying he had 51 votes. The issue wasn't whether or not he had the power to do it. The issue was Joe Biden was president. Joe Biden doesn't have the physical stamina.
I think that's what I commented on.
Do it.
I commented on his fortitude.
Yeah, he doesn't have it in him.
But theoretically,
I guess my point is, yes,
him going up against Manchin.
Maybe this is more nuanced than it needs to be. But yeah, there was a slight policy shift, or in the words of the messaging. But the policy was going to be the policy. That's the point that I'm trying to make. It wasn't like he just decided to go big all of a sudden. They were going to go that way. Even in the framing of it, when he's yelling at China, our talkie, we got to invest in America. That's he believes that on some level. It's just modest in regards to what he's talking about. That's all. If that makes sense, I hope that makes sense. It's the disagreement is only in the sense that Joe Biden was always going to take those policies. How he framed those policies is something different. He could have came on and said these are middle of the road things. No, to your point, he decided to call it FDR, which always sets this big expectation.
Well, at least that's how the press received it, and that's critically where I get to the messaging thing. And who knows how much of that is what Biden's putting down and what the media is picking up. In other words, who knows how much of that was manufactured spin versus just the media running with it.
I think they put that out.
I think they ran with it too, but I just want to put that out there. Yeah. But I want to go to Kamala real quick, who is now planning a trip to the border, shutting Republicans up, but way too late. And the trip to the border thing is a valid thing. She would go there. I have my own take on this that I'm going to refer to. But she would go to the border. This isn't my take, but she would go to the border because she's supposed to handle a migrant crisis at our southern border.
It's her job.
And my take that I've said before is she tried to make this a foreign policy issue instead of a domestic thing.
Right.
We have traditionally considered this, okay, this is a problem at our border.
Right.
We're dealing with this. Illegal immigrants in our country, it's a domestic issue, and we sort of framed it in those terms. It is a foreign policy issue. She tried to make it a foreign policy issue. She can't do it in any kind of effective way. And so for her, it was just like a game of, a cup game or something like that. No, it's not here, it's there.
Right.
It's not domestic policy, it's foreign policy. She went on this big international trip, et cetera. Now she's realizing that strategy didn't work. She continues to get criticized for it. It hasn't fundamentally changed the actual problem, which is the camps set up on our border, still bringing people in. The narrative spinning and shifting and toing and froing of her stepping back and immediately hypocritically going back on her words within the span of a month, constantly criticizing Trump for his handling of the border when she has to repeat twice on air, do not come. You remember what I'm talking about. It's just lunacy, Jamarl.
Yeah, Mike Pence, always on television and everything else. I think I agree with you. I think I may agree with your take on the Kamala Harris. I think I might be a little bit more cynical, though. I think when I first started looking at this and I came across this, I thought, so sometimes I have a tendency to jump ahead in regards to my thinking as opposed to hitting the thing on the thing, if that makes sense. Like, so looking at the Kamala Harris thing, I say to myself, Kamala Harris doesn't care about the border. So even though Joe Biden delegated that responsibility to her, that is not necessarily a responsibility she cares about. She can't speak about it honestly and all this other stuff, but she can't really do anything about it. She doesn't care. So in my head, it's like, Well, of course she's not going to the border. But that's her job.
What does she care about?
I don't know, but it's her job. The vice president is very, president and everything else. But the fact that she's supposed to go there and she basically blew that off, what does that say about her responsibilities in that sense?
I think you're being too charitable here, Jamarl. I don't think she cares about anything. And I'm actually...
I think she cares about power. I think she cares about being president. I think she cares about jet setting in Europe. I don't think she cares about the border.
I don't think she has some passionate push that she's like, okay, she was sent to Congress to save the whales or something like that. She doesn't have okay, I'm here for this. That's my point with that. I think the border thing, what it is, and Pence just handled it better with COVID. It's like an albatross around their neck. Yeah. It's okay. The president's handing this difficult task off to their point man. go, take the flak for it, do your best, keep it going, keep that plate spinning. I'm too busy. I'm sorry, man. Please take this for me, basically. Kamala, had to. She hasn't done much with it, and now she's paying for it. Anyway, we'll be keeping this conversation going in our next hour, coming back with headlines in the last hour of this morning show. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition, another hour of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events across these disunited states of America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Again, folks, good morning. Glad you're still with us. Hope you're having a good one. Let's get into headlines. First up in COVID news, there were about 14,707 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 355 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 11,672 cases per day. That's a decrease of 19% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 46% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 54% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 33,566,522 people across the United States. It's killed 602,917 people across the U.S. In national news, Biden says, American President Joseph R. Biden says he and a bipartisan group have come up with a less than $1.2 trillion infrastructure package that they seem more likely to pass. This comes after months-long failures to get any real movement on an infrastructure bill. The total amount of that bill, which had at one point totaled up to $4 trillion, sort of more extended costs, $4 trillion, including in new taxes, other things, just trimmed down to less than a quarter of that at this point, trimmed down to about a quarter of the official package, less than $600 billion in new spending. We'll see where this goes. Miami officials say they're still looking for about 100 people who may have been in a 12-story building when it collapsed during a fire. 4 people have been found dead so far. 3 more were found this morning. Sounds have been heard from beneath the rubble. Hard to tell if they are voices or just movement of objects. Not a good situation. In New York, Rudy Giuliani's law license has been suspended in New York State after an appeals court ruled that he had made false and misleading statements while trying to sway courts over Trump's failure in the last election. The United States government is due to release a report on UAPs/UFOs today. Those are either unidentified aerial phenomena or unidentified flying objects. And again, we're talking about this great conversation with Avi Loeb, physicist, talking about what these objects could be, what this report could contain, talking about the interstellar object, Oumuamua, talking about a lot. Great conversation. That was from 8:15 to 8:45. Avi Loeb, go back and check that out, definitely. And you can bet we will be watching for the release of this report, and we will be hitting that hard when we come back on Monday. In international news, leaders at an EU summit in Brussels have not come to an agreement over whether or not to reopen talks with Vladimir Putin and Russia, which were suspended following the referendum in Crimea during the Euromaidan over 7 years ago. The Ethiopian military has denied that a military plane that crashed in the Tigray region was shot down by rebels. The Tigrayan People's Liberation Front has claimed that it was shot down by rebels by them, with the Ethiopian government claiming that the plane was merely suffering from mechanical difficulties, explaining the crash thusly. In Somaliland, that's a self-declared republic widely recognized simply as a part of Somalia, a new port has been opened. The port may benefit the neighboring landlocked nation of Ethiopia. In Hong Kong, a security expert has been appointed to the second most powerful job for the first time. That's the position of deputy to the chief executive, Carrie Lam. And Roman Protasevich, the dissident Belarusian journalist pulled from the Ryanair plane that was forced out of the sky by the Belarusian government in an international incident, has been moved into house arrest. So has his girlfriend, reportedly. In Afghanistan, defense officials say they've retaken a northern district that was recently taken by the Taliban. The Taliban has seized dozens of districts in the past few months. And by the way, we had a great conversation about this with Scott Ritter from 7:30 to 8 this morning. Good conversation. A UN mandate allowing the supply of aid across the Turkish border into northwest Syria is about to run out. That leaves the state of that aid in question. We are sadly probably only hearing about this because that's rebel-held territory, though. Again, I just feel the need to say this. We probably wouldn't be hearing about the lack of access of aid to Assad's Syria because, again, it's been systematically deprived. We're kind of in a proxy war with them. But when it comes to the rebels, anyway, we like to talk about that more. That's my point. In Earth and Science news, scientists in Israel say they've discovered remnants of a previously unknown species of early human while studying fossilized fragments of a skull and chin that were discovered in Israel. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Jamarl, it is 53 weeks later. I don't think there's a better time than the present. Last Friday, when you were in Geneva, I didn't realize it at the time, and I only realized it yesterday. I told you about it.
Yes.
We had our 1 year anniversary of you and I hosting the show.
Yes, we did. We did.
Last Friday, I believe, would have been the 1 year since we started a year before, which is it's crazy to think about, man.
Wow. And just keep in mind, when we started, we were like thrown together middle of the week.
Yep.
Just, all right, do the news.
All right, guys.
All right, let's do the news.
Hit it tomorrow morning. That
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was that. Wow, we need to celebrate.
And I have gotten a lot more comfortable on the air.
Yes, you have.
I remember that.
My mom used to say, Shane needs to punch back more.
He needs to punch back more. He needs to speak up a little bit more. Get more comfy, Shane.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
But she has recently, she's like, oh, God, you guys have gotten really good.
We've gotten better. Better in the studio.
Sat there, and just, you can listen straight through the show.
Yeah.
Enjoy, it's a very enjoyable show, especially being in the studio. It's different. It's like you can see the person, you can engage with the person, the cues, all of the social stuff that you typically do to communicate evaporates the moment that you
can't
remove
see each other. You're just talking over the phone or Skype or whatever.
It's like you have to type, like, hey, can I take this? Okay,
no, we've got
this. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. That
exactly.
type of stuff.
You've got the subtle atmospheric Vulcan mind meld thing going on. You've got body language. You got pheromones floating around the room. You got those, you know what I'm saying. You got all the subtler stuff.
But
anyway,
1 year.
That's 1 year.
We need to put like a something in a calendar or something with it. It's always just kind of
53 weeks, and we're always reminded of it.
Yes.
On a yearly basis. Now, what reminded me of this going into this is John McAfee, who, again, for people who haven't been outside of Under the Rock for the last day, John McAfee, big business person, creator of the antivirus software McAfee, died. He was in a jail in prison outside of Barcelona. He died there, apparently by suicide, after the Spanish government decided to extradite him to the United States, where he's wanted on tax evasion charges, but also has like $25 million in pending fines for the killing of the ordering of a killing of a man in Belize, which we talked about this yesterday. Yeah. Wanted on murder. I appeared on Garland and Wilmer's show on the Critical Hour talking about this stuff. So I refreshed myself. I went back and listened to it. We did speak with him less than a year ago.
Yeah, you sent me the link.
I sent you the clip, exactly.
Yeah.
We were less than 2 weeks into the show.
Like that and I think, wow, I'm not doing enough for my life. That's another one of those cases, right? That's a lot of stuff
that he did.
Yeah, or at the very least, is being accused of.
Yes, yeah.
That is so extreme. But yeah, like you said, we talked to him. We spoke to him.
Now, have you heard any of the dead man switch? I think I might have talked about it briefly, but I kind of looked into it more.
You mentioned it, yeah, but I haven't seen anything pop up in the news that says, okay, here's information that's being released from.
A couple of the theories I've seen are definitely not legit, to be clear.
Right.
And then there are other ones that are all big question marks for me. But I'll put it like this.
But the information should have been released by now if if it was a switch.
Yeah, you would think so, unless you need to decrypt it or unless you need to find the needle in the haystack that's the actual decryption switch. But the assumption is, so what is a dead man switch?
Yeah.
A dead man switch, when you die, you can set it up through your lawyer or whatever service, however you set it up. When you die, certain things kick into effect, like you release documents or people do certain things. Usually it has to do with releasing documents. And the idea is, if you get killed or assassinated, if there are people who have it out for you, you get damaging information on them that they don't want leaked, and you put it into a file that will then be released to the public for everybody to consume. You've probably seen this in movies where characters will, like, before they publish their story, they mail it to all the news outlets. You get what I'm saying? You know, in case anything happens to me, every outlet across the country will get this letter within 6 hours, that kind of thing. You get the point. Right. Well, people have been claiming that John McAfee did this. He set this up. John McAfee notoriously has said multiple times he would never kill himself. He said recently he was having a good time in jail. His widow, former wife, said that the U.S. government had it out for him and that she believed that they had taken this hit on him, basically. He'd gotten a tattoo, whacked, which many of you have probably seen, that is associated with a cryptocurrency of his that he created around the time that Jeffrey Epstein died. The joke being Jeffrey Epstein was whacked. Right. Anyway, he created this cryptocurrency. Now, there are two big sort of conspiracy theory or things floating around right now. One has to do with an Instagram post. One has to do with this whacked cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
The Instagram post, shortly after he died, within the minutes following his death, his Instagram shared a photo of a Q, like the letter Q.
Yeah.
I think it's like a blue big letter Q. And this could have to do with QAnon. We're still speculating on what this is. Anyway, in the minutes following this posting, it was later removed. People inspecting it saw metadata that they were like, is this an encrypted key? Is this something inside of this image that he shared that we can use to access this dead man switch, this file that he's talked about, these terabytes of data that he has on people that he has said he will release if he is taken out? They looked into it. Turns out that's just Instagram's like watermark. Right. That's like the little code they add to identify it as their thing. So that's one theory knocked out. Now there's another theory that has to do with Whacked, which is, again, to remind you, the cryptocurrency. Right. He created a couple of years back, had to do with the death of Jeffrey Epstein. He has this tattoo. People think it might have to, has something to do with his dead man switch. So the thing is, this is a cryptocurrency that does exist.
Yes.
And then there have been a bunch of copycat cryptocurrencies, also calling themselves Whacked, completely identical to it, that have popped up simultaneously. And they've all been very active recently, including the legitimate Whacked cryptocurrency, which shot up in value immediately following his death. And what I've heard some people say, now it's hard for me to tell whether there's truth to this because there's so many copycats. What I've heard some people say is that the legitimate one, which had been very inactive for a long period of time, started to get active on its own end, started to sort of send out requests and do transactions from its end right when he died, basically. It immediately kicked into effect. And what people are doing is trying to what I hear they're doing is trying to pour through those transactions, finding, okay, is the key in here? Are there links? Where's the file? That kind of thing. I see. They're inspecting it. And who knows what will come of that?
The value just went up just because it's kind of like a work of art.
Oh, and it's an event, and he died.
Yeah.
And it's just
and people's like,
time there.
That's going to be expensive one day, so I'm just going to buy this. And people are like, whoa.
And people are like, everybody else knows this thing is linked to that other thing.
Yeah.
Everybody else knows this cryptocurrency linked to this guy who just died.
Who said he'd never kill himself.
Who said he'd never kill himself. Yeah. Value's probably going to skyrocket because everybody else is probably thinking the exact same thing I am, which is, we should all get in on this right now. You know what I mean? And it shot up and then it shot back down. So some people bought in and then they definitely sold out. They made a lot of money right then. Weird events.
Wow.
But characteristic of John McAfee. A weird dude.
That is so wild. I mean, if you say you live your entire life, like he's Elizabeth Warren.
Explain that to me tomorrow.
So Elizabeth Warren starts her political campaign back in the presidency saying, I will never take super PAC money. And super PAC money is the problem. These big guys are giving all of this money in the shadows and in the dark to these candidates, and they're influencing political behavior. And I, Elizabeth Warren, just like Bernie Sanders, would never take money.
Yeah.
And then you get all the way through the campaign, and she gets on stage and says, me and this other woman here, I forget her name, are the only people on the stage who didn't take money from super PACs. Now, that's a lie, right? And Sanders is looking around like, what in the world is happening in this moment? Because she's basically attacking him, saying that guy is dirty in this kind of weird, salacious way. Then she runs out of money because her campaign goes bust when people realizes she's lying about Medicare for all. And people are like, look, if we're going to back somebody who we trust, Sanders has been this way forever. I mean, Sanders was in the wilderness and he was saying the exact same thing. People hated him when we were saying he said the same thing. So now they're attacking him for being too consistent. All right, he believes it. He's a true believer. We're going to back him. Elizabeth Warren goes in the shadows. And she, in the moment, money gone, bust of a campaign, she decides to stay into the race by what does she do, Shane?
She takes super PAC money.
She takes super PAC money. She takes super PAC money just to stay in the race long enough to sop up the vote to hurt the same Bernie Sanders.
But wait, are you saying that John McAfee is that way, but with suicide? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know either.
I'm just saying it's possible. And there's a total mind, screwing for him to do that in his entire life. And he sits in his cell one day and says,
but he's the trickster. He's the fundamental trickster figure. And I could see him doing that kind of thing. Yeah.
I am going to screw them over and they're going to talk about me forever.
I'll put it like this. With the exception of the assassination that he allegedly ordered. Yeah. And again, ordered by a Florida judge. This is the important point. It was supposed to have taken place in Belize. But a Florida judge, when hearing requests from the family, $25 million fine, damages, funeral costs, emotional damages, all that stuff, just a general compensation. With the exception of that, he's like a nonviolent pirate or something like that. He has that international fugitive. He doesn't seem to hurt too many people. He's just a really weird dude who does drugs and a bunch of alcohol and you know what I mean, just drinks all the time, that kind of thing. He's just a weird dude, which is why a lot of people are sad to see him go. Yeah. However it happened, whether he did it. But that's the thing. I could see him having done it. And I could see him both depressed, really anxious about Spain, and also being like, I wonder what my supporters will think. I wonder what they'll do with this.
Or I will, because they won't believe I'll learn them. Even that. I'll learn those people for all that stuff.
But what's weird is he said that he was happy. What's weird is that he said that he was happy. He said he was enjoying the food. But if he's worried about a lifelong sentence, if he's worried about getting whacked when he comes to the States, whatever.
Yeah, that's rough, man. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's like the Epstein thing. I have no idea if Epstein offed himself. Said he did. I don't know. There's too many anomalies that are associated with that particular thing for me to come away with a God assessment of he did it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's like, so the cameras were broken? Both of them were asleep?
That's the thing with
and
Epstein. I can't wait for that kind of thing to happen. I really hope it does with McAfee. I hope there's a conspiracy. Yeah. I want to give hope to the people who are like, he's not dead. He's not dead. He faked it. He got away.
He absconded to Mexico.
Exactly. Anyway, we gotta go to a break. We'll be coming back with Kim Iverson, talking about a bunch of stuff. We'll probably hit McAfee, too. We'll be talking about Gavin Newsom, his troubles in California, other topics, general politics. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back with Kim Iverson, YouTube host, political analyst, cool person, on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So, Capitol push attempt by some. I think a riot on the Capitol, definitely a siege on the Capitol. I don't think that would be without question. I think that can be uncritically said. And these people who basically raided the Capitol, pushed, incentivized by Donald Trump, are now being prosecuted. And the prosecutions are starting. First prosecution. An Indiana grandmother of 5 pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor count of parading to a Capitol building on Wednesday, becoming the first of more than 400 defendants to be sentenced in connection with the Capitol riot. Ann Morgan Lloyd, 49, Bloomfield, Indiana, pleaded guilty on Wednesday afternoon in a virtual hearing before Judge Royce Lamberth. Now, she will be sentenced. And right here, I'll just go to according to the federal court, Morgan was basically one of the people who raided the Capitol. She was one of the first people into the Capitol. And she was arrested in Indiana in February, taken into custody in Florida in March. They're going to be charged. Is this right? And this is being used by other governments around the world to basically point to the United States of saying, you have your own political prisoners, which I cringe at because these people are not political prisoners. I think my guest is going to disagree with me on that. We have Kim Iverson. She's an independent journalist, host of Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. Kim, hated that introduction, but I cringe. You get my point, and we can get these people. Hated that introduction, but we can get around to having a conversation about the January 6th thing and whether or not these people who are being charged should be charged or should be treated in the way that they've been treated. How are you doing, Kim? Thank you, and welcome to the show. You get my point.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No idea what that audio was, but it was great to have you too, Kim. Thanks for joining us.
Kim, can you hear me? Treat it.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Kim? Thank you, and welcome to the show.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Andre, our engineer is saying
Kim,
it might be on your side.
Do you turn down your computer, Kim? If you're on Skype, you may be listening to the show at the exact same time, and I think it's bleeding through.
It sounds like she cut out or something like that. Okay. We're trying to work it out.
No worries.
Having a conversation about what happened on January 6th and the prosecution of people since then. And you're kind of laying out the case. Different people have different takes. I'll put it like this, Jamarl. I was like, it depends on what footage you look at. Some of the footage, it's protesters banging on doors with pretty much whatever they can, trying to get inside, trying to break in, and it looks like a riot. Other times, they're just people standing around these beautiful spaces, milling quietly around the Capitol building, looking like they've lost their tour guide, frankly, and they're trying to look like they fit in. So it really depends on which part of the elephant you're touching.
But
whatever.
I would say Morgan Lloyd was not one of those people just kind of moseying around. She actually did go into the Capitol.
Yeah.
And they said they believe she served 2 days in jail. It should be eye-opening and it served as a deterrent for future criminal conduct. The Department of Justice basically said of the grandmother of 5, she's contrite for her act. She said she's sorry. She realizes that her going into the Capitol building emboldened some of the people who were more violent who also went into the Capitol building. She's been prosecuted. She should be prosecuted. You raided the Capitol, and you did so at the behest of Donald Trump. That's where I'm at. Now, there are other people who are far more violent that raided the Capitol. Like one guy, they released a video of this guy who was a former Marine who was basically beating the devil out of one of the cops. Look, as an African-American, I have a wild, this is wild to me because it would never occur to me to be out there fist fighting cops. Like, I would be shot. Okay. And so to see that, it's very weird and very heady that they would even be like, yeah, let's do this. Let's go fight some cops. Because that's basically what was taking place with some of them. Like you said, some were moseying around like nothing was taking place. Hundreds of cops ended up in a hospital. Those cops, I can show you the videos of these guys are like fist fighting. These guys, and in this case, this specific video that was released, beating this cop and then goes out and says, we need more patrons. But why? Because we're fist fighting the cops.
Yeah, so
we need to make sure we can win this battle.
So the common sense thing would be that person definitely gets prosecuted, and then a lot of the others are like, you got to talk about it.
Yeah,
like the elderly lady who's in there.
But you know why they prosecuted her? They prosecuted her to make the point of saying this is radically unacceptable. That's the point.
Which is itself radically unacceptable. Because if you look, because if you look at what happened on January 6th, compare that to what happened to America with the Patriot Act. Again, an argument that Glenn Greenwald has made, other people have made. The government itself is guilty of far greater crimes than the American people.
That's true.
If you can even blame them.
That's true.
And, it would be collective punishment too, of course. But then the American people are guilty of on January 6th. What factually happened? As far as I can tell, some people got into fistfights with people they shouldn't have. The people who died were the people who were protesting.
You mean cops?
Yes.
You mean cops?
Exactly.
These are people they shouldn't. I'm just saying, call it what it is.
Yeah.
They were fist fighting with cops.
Exactly.
And that is not necessarily let's not gloss over that. Let's not gloss over that. And that's not saying people they shouldn't. We need to be very specific about who we're talking about, because that has a certain significance where you're saying
go for it.
These guys are
wouldn't that have
elements of authority.
But wouldn't that have significance with the Antifa protest too? I mean, people have been fighting with cops for the last year continuously.
Not like that.
That's par for the course, man.
Well,
more than that. A lot more than that.
Most of the time, no.
Cops got killed last year during the protest. They didn't get killed at the January 6th.
Cops did get killed last year. Fair enough.
So more than this.
By the same token, if you're looking at, in fact,
read
your media.
But
real quick, read your media for the moment and your take of the media over the course of let's say, that time period. What you saw mostly was cops being brutalizing those protesters, beating the devil out of people. Those cops were getting prosecuted because those cops were flagrantly beating protesters.
And Ashley Babbitt got shot.
No,
the point
that I'm making to you, there is a difference in tenor. Those people who were at those other protests at the very least recognized that the cops were authority because they took those beatings. You can say Portland. I would say Portland is somewhat of a different thing, and I would agree with you that I don't agree with the balkanization of that. So I've never said, let's balkanize this thing. I'm talking about the majority of the protests across the United States. Cops were not ignored in the sense of their authority. Cops were the beating party. You have all sorts of papers and outlets saying, this was taking place.
Okay.
So it's not the same. These guys were out there literally fist fighting cops as if they were in some kind of battle for the soul of America. Let's be, call it what it is. Be honest.
Kim, what's your take? Kim Iverson.
Hi.
Welcome back, Kim.
Thank you. I mean, here's the thing. They haven't been able to charge anyone with the crime that they really wanted to charge people with. So they have 500 people, and they haven't been able to charge a single one with sedition. That in and of itself speaks volumes about what really happened January 6th. So, of course, there are people that need to be charged with crimes if there are crimes that were committed. But somebody loitering basically in the hallways of the Capitol, I'm not sure if that...
That's the thing.
That's really... And that right there does feel like more of a political prisoner. A grandma who was just loitering around for 10 minutes in the Capitol, was never violent, never was, didn't do anything other than just be there.
The joke that I made, and I'm going to repeat, is that it looked like they lost their tour guide. They were just hanging out in the Capitol building, sort of waiting, milling around with flags and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and for a lot of the people, I think that's what for them, they just got caught up in the moment, and they were like, oh, well, here we are. This is interesting. Wow, I've never been inside of this place. And that's really what it was. But of course, there are those like members of the Proud Boys, and, there was various different groups like Proud Boys, and I'm trying to remember all the groups that they...
Boogaloo Boys and the Oath Keepers. Yeah.
Right, Oath Keepers and 3 Percenters. And, they're going after them, and those guys did commit more crimes. But even then, they still... and this is, I think, the biggest point of all, is they have not been able to charge a single person with actual sedition.
But I don't know why that matters.
Because that's the narrative here. The narrative is that this was sedition.
The narrative is they raided the Capitol.
Well, but that this was an insurrection. That is the word that has consistently been thrown around.
Insurrection.
And to look in a mirror that we have used on this show.
Yes,
and I've taken it calling it a breach. That's kind of become my preferred thing, because that is technically 100% accurate, and beyond that, it's up to the subject.
I always think raid is very specific. I like raid. Insurrection, insurrection is somewhat political in regards to the way it's being.
But the point is, if it were one, wouldn't they have been charged that way? And that's exactly what you're saying here, Kim. I mean,
right, and they're claiming, the government is kind of claiming, well, it's because we're going after easy, this is the kind of crap that they're trying to feed us now when they have not been able to charge a single person. They have 500 people charged. Not one of them has been charged, not one with sedition. And then they say, well, it's because we're going after easier crimes to, where we'll have more of a slam dunk case like obstruction and weapons charges, ones that we know are going to yield prison sentences. And I can tell you that's a bunch of crap, because if they could get them for sedition, and the Biden administration is saying, well, if we charge people with sedition, it'll be too political. It's crap. If they could get them for sedition, they would.
If they could charge people with sedition, yeah. I on some level, I agree. That would be extremely political, and it would take somewhat of a harder case if they could. I don't know, Kim. I mean, the more I think about it, I'm not sure it matters. I mean, from the standpoint that they're looking at, something dramatic happened on January 6th. And in their heads, we need to make sure this doesn't happen again, and we need to get across the seriousness and severity of this. So, yes, that grandma who wandered in, who looked lost, will get prosecuted for 2 days because she did such. And the people who did worse will get prosecuted. And they're doing the very specific and technicalities of the crime that they're going along with. I understand your point. It's like they're saying that these guys tried to overthrow America, but I never accepted that they were the ones trying to overthrow America. My issue was Trump was trying to do it.
But then why are they being blamed for it? Isn't that why is this random lady being made an example of? Why have hundreds of people been arrested?
Because she decided to raid the Capitol.
Okay, but raid the Capitol.
Of Donald
but this
Trump.
is the equivocation. This is okay. What
There's
language
no
are we going to use?
I've always
is it an insurrection? Is it a breach? Is it a raid? Is it a tour guide? Is it a tour? What is it?
Well, you don't want to use that tour. I never said that.
I know it's a joke.
I've always said I've always used the term either insurrection or raid. I think raid is very specific and technical, or like you said, breach.
But again, between the dude who got into the fight with the cop and was bludgeoning the cop and whatever, a fist fight with the cop, between that and the lady who had to use her cane or whatever, walking around, there's a lot of gray area.
And by the way, Grandma, she's 49.
There we go.
I'm 43.
Yeah.
So let's put this up in perspective. It's not like an 80-year-old woman. So let's stop the loaded terminology. Thank you for saying grandma.
But here's the thing. The other side of this that worries me. Okay, yesterday, I believe it was, you played the Mark Milley clip in your monologue. Mark Milley, American general.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Talking about critical race theory. And it seems, okay, why am I bringing this up? He blamed, with what happened on January 6th, I forget what it was. White rage.
Oh, white rage.
He's talking about how we all need to understand white rage. As a white person, he needs to understand white rage. Okay, whatever. There might be something there. But if that's what the narrative is becoming, I did not see January 6th as a racialized event. But the consensus among the people there seems to be, okay, these are white supremacists. These groups are white supremacists. Trump's a white supremacist. This whole thing. My point is, the narrative that this was an insurrection, that it was a white supremacist insurrection, that the Republicans are still pitted with that. Right. A lot of people in our society accept that premise, which scares me because I fundamentally see it as so off base. And if that's what the narrative is, if that's the boogeyman that the government is constructed to respond to, I'm afraid of what's to come. Kim, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It clearly was not an insurrection. You have to stop using that term. If they were not able to get a single person on charges of sedition out of the 500 people, then there just simply was no insurrection. And it wouldn't even be an insurrection if they got one person. I mean, that would be, okay, one person out of all of those thousands of people thought that they were going to potentially cause a rebellion and overthrow the government of some sort. I mean, and sedition, by the way, all you have to do is they just have to prove that you had speech. Sedition can be speech. It's not just that you actually had an overt act of organizing. You could just say that you were trying to organize a rebellion against the government. They haven't been able to get anybody on that. And I bet you they went over phone records, emails, and chats, and they did everything. And they have not been able to charge a single person with sedition. So I think that everybody in media, but of course they won't, has to drop the term insurrection. It is not.
But they don't. I still disagree with that. And I don't think you guys have made this argument right.
I will put it...
because let me put it this way.
Okay.
From the standpoint of insurrection, it's not just the individuals involved. Those particular individuals who went raiding the Capitol, yes, were part of an insurrection, but the insurrection wasn't just a singular entity of those people. It was also Donald Trump.
Is insurrection...
Again, I keep making the point that Donald Trump is the key here that makes this more than anything else. It was Trump that was trying the coup. Those people were just there as a way of trying to push this along.
But it's like if we're talking about some big event, and I keep using the phrase murderers, and it turns out nobody actually died. Somebody got hurt, whatever. But I keep using this phrase murderers. It is a legal term. It refers to a crime,
right.
a pretty damn serious one,
right.
and it set the stage for how we talk about these things. It is a criminal term. As far as I'm aware, sedition, the legal term, sedition specifically, and we're talking about insurrection, that has not just connotations, but, legal implications specifically. If people are not guilty of that crime, then why are we using the term? We shouldn't be using the term. That's the point
that I'm trying to make to you, Shane. Those people were there at an event that was an insurrection against the government of the United States.
But
that's my take.
But where did Trump suborn that? When did he do that?
You mean
Where
when
did he
he's
suborn?
Trying to get people to do things that are not within the context of their constitutional power, like Mike Pence, who he's screaming at Mike Pence, trying to get Mike Pence to basically gum up the works in the transfer of power?
Yes.
What are you talking about? That's literally what Trump was trying to do.
Okay, but that's not illegal. As far as I can tell, that's not illegal.
It is not.
And that's not insurrection.
What are you talking about? I mean, Donald Trump.
I don't like it. I don't think it was good. I think it was unwise.
I am making the point to you that Donald Trump, right now, Donald Trump is still saying that Joe Biden is not the real president of the United States.
And I disagree with him.
You can disagree with him all you want, but that is a secondary
right?
rival power in this country that is basically inciting 30% of the Republican base to say that Joe Biden didn't even win the election.
But is that not his right? Is that not a stupid decision? But
is that his right?
Legal? Yeah.
I mean, this is getting to this notion of whether or not you have sovereign power, and what does it mean to have more than one sovereign power within the context of a nation? It's problematic. The moment that he is trying to get Roethlisberger, by the way, he's being investigated for this on whether or not that's a crime. So we're going to find out later on whether or not it's specifically a crime. They're probably not going to get to the point of saying Donald Trump committed a crime, blah, blah, blah. But could they, if they were being more vigorous? Yes. The reasons they don't do it are entirely political, though. It's the exact same reason they didn't put Joe.
That's not insurrection. That's whatever. It is corruption, unjust use of authority. I mean, but Kim.
You are pushing various people who are in a political space to do things that go beyond their legal authority. That's what is taking place. That's the bare bones of it.
It's been a lot of back and forth.
You're getting a lot of people in the country itself. Well, I'm responding to you.
No, I hear. I just want to bring Kim back into the conversation.
And I'm responding to you.
Totally.
I'm responding to you. Are you going to let me respond to you or not? Or are you going to keep pushing me to the letter involved? Thank you. He is pushing people to do things that are illegal. You have a huge mass of people who are raiding the Capitol under this notion of being patriots. Yes, some of them are useful idiots. Some of those people are more vigorous and everything else. But at the end of the day, you have people who are beating cops, who are fighting cops. You're acting like that stuff is just trivial. And then raid the Capitol in and of itself with people looking for members of Congress to basically either hang or assault or abuse. This is not a trivial matter. And whether or not those individual entities and ideas of people could be charged with sedition or not is secondary to the point that the act itself, all of it in its totality, yes, is an insurrection against this government, or at the very least, a failed one. Kim.
Well, okay. So I think you're right in some ways in that, yes, they did attempt to do something. And I think where Shane and I are having an issue is what that something is. And you're saying that something is an insurrection, which is very specific. That means you are trying to overtly cause a rebellion and overthrow the government in some way and, overtly go against, the government. But really what these people did and what they're being charged with, because what they've been able to prove is that they were obstructing a vote. Very specifically, what they wanted to do, and the only thing they wanted to do was to obstruct the vote of the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially was akin to a collective filibuster by these people.
To transfer power over to Joe Biden.
Well,
they wanted to stop the transfer of power to Joe Biden.
Yes.
No, we don't actually transfer the power until January 20th.
I get that, but they're trying to gum up the works within the context of that transfer.
The ratification of the Electoral College votes, just to be what we're talking about.
A filibuster, that's what a filibuster does too, right? So in a filibuster, you're attempting to stop, some...
You're minimizing it, Kim.
Happening.
You're minimizing it. You're minimizing the severity. I think you're minimizing the severity. I've been to African countries. I've been to African countries where you have multiple people who never concede.
Yeah.
And because they never concede, you have these warring parts where it's like, I'm not going to accept the legitimacy of that election. And then you even have Trump on video saying, well, look, because the election was dodgy, then it doesn't, meaning what you do in this case is on some level permitted. I mean, this stuff is really extreme. I'm not minimizing this at all in this case. And I don't think it should be minimized.
Okay, but what about the countries? I mean, you use these examples of, these African countries, but there are other countries where there is a legitimate question about the vote, where obviously, look at what happened just in Iran, where the government just wouldn't even allow people to run for office, for president. So, I mean, there are legitimate cases, and that can't be discarded either, where people say, I don't believe this vote was fair. And they have to be able to express that. That is absolutely fundamental to us being a democracy.
It is.
That way, when you look at it from that lens, they were expressing the very fabric of what a democracy is in America.
You mean raiding the Capitol was expressing the very fabric of what democracy is?
No, I don't think that the overt act of trying to obstruct the vote was the right way to do it, but I don't disagree with their ability to express why they were doing it.
By raiding the Capitol.
What they did was wrong, but why they did it, I cannot categorically say is wrong. Like, how dare you question an election or a vote? I think it's categorically wrong to tell them that that's wrong.
I don't care if they question the vote. Flatlines, to our credit, was open to the questioning of the vote tally for a while, actually. And we said that Donald Trump has the right to basically get that vote, meaning any president has the right to question a vote tally, whether that's John Kerry, whether that's Al Gore. All of these people have the right to say, look, we need to ensure that this election was correct, et cetera, et cetera. Donald Trump, supposedly a billionaire, all of these people everywhere across the United States had every impetus in the world to try to find data, information, something to legitimize his claim of being cheated. He didn't find any. And so I get that on some level, people could take a particular position of saying, hey, we believe this. But at a certain point, that belief has to be regarded with a certain level of, is it objectively true, or is it more likely than not for this person to believe this, or does this person believe this just because it's in their self-interest? Donald Trump would have never conceded, period. And so a guy who would have never conceded, who didn't concede, I am not necessarily going to take his word for it, especially if there's not anything there to take his word for it. Meaning, I don't care that those people think that. In that sense, it's self-interest. What I care about is the cancerous nature that it has on this country. And look, whether that was Democrats and the way they did Russiagate stuff, whether that was Republicans and the Merrick Garland stuff, or whether it's this and Donald Trump or Obama and the birth certificate. It's like, at a certain point, Shane, please.
I was going to pivot because we've been talking about this for a good little while, and we also wanted to talk about Gavin Newsom, which, Kim, you're a California guest of ours. I was going to hit that with you. But we've also been going deep into this, and I didn't want to arbitrarily pivot. Kim, wanted to give you a response here to come back on what Jamarl was saying. What's your take?
No, I mean, I think I've said what I want to say. We can pivot real quick. I don't have much to say about the Newsom thing, but I can quickly give you my quick take on it.
It'd be good. Yeah, and just to set the stage for people, the idea of recalling Newsom as governor of California now in motion, basically. And I hear that many LA folks, Hollywood folks are backing it. He's Bradley not doing well. He and Cuomo, among the governors who originally trumpeted and paraded as successfully handling the pandemic last year, now facing failure. Newsom, again, potentially being recalled. What's your take on his governorship, Kim?
At first I didn't think he would actually be, I mean, he's being recalled, but whether or not the recall, a recall is kind of like an impeachment, right? So the term is kind of confusing. So he's being recalled, but whether or not the recall actually, ends up with him no longer being California governor, I didn't think at first that would actually be the scenario, but now I'm kind of changing my mind on that, mostly because I think that there are so many Democrats, the hate vote, you can never discount the hate vote. And I just don't think there's that many Democrats that really think Gavin Newsom will lose. So I don't know if they'll come out to vote. This is happening during a time when it's not going to be a midterm election. It's not going to be a presidential election. It's just like this weird time where people are only going out to vote for maybe this one thing. And I just don't think they're going to get enough Democrats who are going to show up to the polls to save Newsom's skin. So I think a lot of Republicans and a lot of people who hate Newsom are going to show up in droves. I'm not so sure about the average Democrat that just thinks, oh, yeah, that's just a right-wing Republican QAnon conspiracy. Not going to come out and save him for that. But the only thing is, though, is that the Republican side or any challenge, I mean, it could be a Democrat that challenges as well, but the Democrats won't put anybody up. I think that's a mistake. But the problem with the Republicans is they just haven't coalesced around one candidate. But I think if they do, I think Gavin Newsom might actually be in trouble.
How did he fail so monstrously? I mean, because California, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, California was one of those states that was seen to be, I mean, I remember ProPublica, I believe it was, wrote an article called Tale of Two Cities, where they were comparing California and New York and showing how New York failed, but California, on some level, succeeded.
And it probably would have been the Bay Area compared to New York City specifically, because the Bay Area was doing very well.
Exactly. It was this kind of comparative thing.
I lived there for a little while the pandemic was going on. I moved there. I remember last year, I moved to the Bay Area. I was living in down San Jose area for about a month. Yeah, they handled it a lot better than LA did. And even they still seem to have handled it fairly well, but LA's had problems. And Newsom, the lockdowns have been strict, ongoing, long.
Is that what it is?
That kind of thing. Kim, living on the ground there, what are the problems with him?
Yeah, that is particularly it. We were the first to lock down, and we have now been the last to come out of lockdown. You understand, we just came out of lockdown 5 days ago.
Wow.
That was it. Yeah, we've been in it this whole time, and we started the lockdown first. We were the first country in the nation. So we've been in lockdown for over a year, where businesses have not been able to open up. People have not been able to go back to work really fully, or, there's just life has been totally upended for people. And we didn't end up any better off. I mean, we still ended up with 0% availability in our ICUs. In a lot of areas, we were worse than a lot of the country because we did hit that unfortunate 0%. I mean, a lot of areas maybe got close, but they didn't quite get there. And we did, despite all of the lockdowns.
In LA specifically, I remember that they had Dodger Stadium set up as an emergency pop-up hospital. At least they were talking about setting that up for a little while. Isn't that right, Kim?
Yeah, Staples.
The Staples Center.
Right. Yeah, they had a variety of places that they were setting up. So it really didn't result. I mean, we ended up in the same position pretty much as Florida. But, we've got a similar climate, so I think that has a lot to do with it. But we ended up pretty much the same, and yet businesses totally went under and collapsed out here.
10 cities.
We were one of the worst off.
You guys have shanty towns for all intents and purposes. I mean, I don't know what else basically to call it.
Skid Row in LA.
It is very
San
weird.
Francisco is not better.
It is very, very weird. It's like sometimes you can go on YouTube and you can see these like huge areas where people are just living on the streets. How did COVID in the context of that? I mean, does California even acknowledge that? Or is that just something California just says, okay, that's an act of God? I don't know. How does California regard that, especially with COVID?
What do you mean exactly? Like the homeless population was ravaged by it, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Like how does, meaning during the COVID time, did California do anything specific to the homeless population in order to try to resolve the homeless population? Or did it just accept, okay, well, the homeless population just is, and COVID will just ravage that community?
Well, they didn't really get hit because they're outside all the time. So they actually did better as a demographic than some other groups. Actually, the worst hit groups for us were more the Hispanic community. They live in tightly, they have a lot of people in one apartment.
Multi-generational housing, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they were the ones that actually were hit the hardest. And nothing was done. No, nothing was done. They just now announced the only measure that they really are going to do, which is they are going to, thank goodness, and I'm sure this is he's trying to save his skin, they are going to forgive all the back rent for everybody who lost their jobs and was unable to pay their rent. And that is the least they could do, but they really need to also try to make businesses whole.
And also, what about the landlords? This is the whole thing with delaying rent payments. The other side of this, we talked about BlackRock, big institutional buyer, investor coming in and picking up real estate all over the place. You think of the individual landlord, maybe has a few $1 million in different assets, whatever, but they're just getting into real estate. It's one of their things. They haven't been getting paid. They have to sell their house. Who buys it up? BlackRock. Now, I'm not saying all of the back due payments I'm very much not saying all the back due payments should suddenly come in, but what's the policy there? And, is there a conversation about what I was just talking about there? The idea that this is going to seriously hurt a bunch of people who own homes, and that probably what's going to happen is they're going to get put out of business. They're going to have to sell, and BlackRock, companies like it, investment firms like it, come in, pick all that up. That's not good. I don't think that's going to be popular. Is that in the conversation about that? Have you been hearing about that or thinking about that, Kim?
I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. I think they assume that people with mortgages were fairly protected. The banks kind of stepped in and said, okay, you don't have to pay mortgage for a while. It was the renters that were really, really hurt. But the big one is the businesses. I think that there will be a housing crisis, but it's just not happening right now. The housing crisis will happen later when these businesses that had to go under are not able to ever rebuild. And so then people don't live with as much money as they once had. And so then they do have to downsize their house, or they have to foreclose, or they have to sell. But I think that's going to trickle in over the next decade. I don't think that's something that's going to happen this year. People are still living off of maybe the pandemic aid or
whatever savings they have built up, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Or their house, exactly. They're going through their savings, but it will eventually hit, and all of that will come.
That'll hit the housing market, because that is the backstop for a lot of people. That's we just moved from homelessness to talking about housing. That's like the last thing. You get your gas cut off, but you don't want to get kicked out. Whatever, for a lot of people, writing that line. Kim, we got to go into our taking calls segment. Thank you very much for joining us. Fun conversation as always. Kim Iverson, good talking.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being with us. Kim Iverson, for those listening, is an independent journalist and host of The Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. You can watch that show on YouTube, youtube.com/Kim Iverson. Also check out rockfin.com/Kim. Again, rockfin.com/Kim. You'll find there her video feed on Rockfin. Subscribe to her there. You're listening to Fault Lines, and we're coming back taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Be right back with you on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. We have Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line.
Real quick, before Michael, we have one more comment. Jeff Kuntz, Invisible Man. This guy has always helped me with a lot of the content or stories and stuff like that.
What's up?
He says, great interview. Jamal, great line of questioning. Sandy and I were smiling when Shane got Professor Avi to take us all to school. Shane set up deeper questions. You guys are a great team. Jeff.
Oh, that's awesome. Good compliments. That's good to hear. Wait, what were you talking about with Avi that you brought up?
Well, I don't know. You asked him something apparently. Jeff was like, wow, that's brilliant. Yeah. And Avi got to take us to school.
Yeah, Avi was great. Yeah, it'd be lovely to talk with him again. And thank you for the really kind comments there, Frank. Michael, calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I like to say, you talked about the Britney Spears conservatorship before. This is something very close to my heart. I was in China in 2014, and the New South Wales government took out a conservatorship against me, basically, effectively. I was awarded the New South Wales government here in Australia, in China, in Absentina. I was tried in Absentina in China, where I told me I had no jurisdiction. The Chinese government issued me with a humanitarian passport to return to Australia because basically they didn't trust the Australian government to arrest me on arrival. And I was sent on a direct flight back from Beijing to China. They didn't want me to be stopped over anywhere. They sent me on a direct flight back. And I would just like to say, as someone who's been under conservatoriumship, where I've had my estate, the grand estate of Michael Riley of $2,000 managed by the Australian government, or the New South Wales government, more to be specific, which is a state within New South Wales, this is crap. This is absolute all baloney. Why? I would like to see 1/4 of all people shot and killed by the police are mentally ill. Where are Mad Lives Matters? Where the hell are Mad Lives Matters? If you want to get me involved in identity politics, if you want to divide the working class with identity politics, bring up Mad Lives Matters. Where are Mad Lives Matters?
You're talking about people basically standing up for people with either a history of mental illness or who are currently dealing with long-term mental problems, whatever you want to, because I don't even, the language or the ideas here gets a little bit more nuanced. But that idea, like an advocacy movement for people dealing with the state, dealing with rights, that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about, Michael?
Now, what I'm talking about is why is it okay to strip me of all my... I can be arrested in my country without warrant. I can be picked up off of the street without warrant, without committing a crime in New South Wales and Australia. I can be arrested without warrant, without committing a crime. I've been arrested over 30 times in my country and never been charged with a single crime.
Yes, it is screwed up. And what makes it complicated is that the state is trying to do something, in my opinion, that should be done by the community. It's this Latin term, compos mentis, or if you're of sound mind, which makes perfect sense. We're supposed to be free people within our society. But say a toddler steps off the curb and is about to pass in front of a car. Say it's the same person, but they're having a break, they're having a psychotic break, whatever. If you're not of sound mind, if you're not a reasonable individual, say you're 12 years old, again, coming back to the toddler thing, there's certain categories of people that we sort of put into this class. We will make some of their decisions for them. Right. And that gets screwed up when the person is of sound mind. Right. They have another type of mind. Right. And we are radically not permissive of their kind of weirdness.
And our legal system has just said, this secondary layer of reality, that person is not of mind to make choices.
Yeah.
Regardless of the truth.
And then you hand over the reins either to an outside party, like in the case of Britney Spears, her father, who is profiting off of of what he calls her sickness, or a big bureaucracy like a state government, like New South Wales, like you're talking about. Those are both bad situations. You can see how that power will be abused, how people will be put in situations they shouldn't, and whether it's slavery, like we were talking about in the case of Britney Spears, or dozens of detentions, just weird stuff that happens. Michael, I hear you on that. There does. I was thinking about this issue both last night and this morning walking into the studio. I agree with you. There really does need to be an advocacy movement. People are weird about this stuff. People are weird talking about mental illness, quote unquote. But because I'm not sure, again, with a lot of the stuff that term even applies. But Michael, thank you for the call. We have more callers I want to go to. Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
I have 3 quick comments. First, free journalist signs, free journalism. Stella Morris and the family overseas need to come over here and speak to Congress and Senate. Second comment, to understand what happened in the past 7 years dealing with what's going on with BLM and Proud Boys and Antifa, you got to understand what happened in the 60s with COINTELPRO. So documents have to be released from the 60s all the way till present time, and justice got to be done for all, not just for one group. My last comment is dealing with John McAfee. Man, he rests in heaven. The fight continues. He was a freedom fighter. I agree with everything he said, but
same.
His mind.
But same on both counts.
So he was interviewed by someone from Vice, and I linked the link to y'all tweet for today. And basically, he was trying to enter the U.S. embassy, and the embassy employees told him that he was being blocked. So he assumed that it was Hillary Clinton. I'm going by what he was saying. So what he done to get back at them, he donated laptops to the secretaries full with spyware. And he said he was
he was spying on them using laptops. Is that what you're saying?
Is that a true story, Tarif?
That's what he's saying. From what Tarif is saying, that's what he said in this interview.
Listen. Okay, listen. I got the link. His teeth shaded in the link. You can see his mouth moving. He's body.
I'll check it out. Yeah, you said you posted it on Twitter. We've got to close this out in just a second here. There's one more thing on McAfee, but I don't think we have enough time. Maybe we'll come back to it next week. It has to do with quantum immortality and him playing Russian roulette repeatedly with an interviewer and surviving. But there's an anecdote we can come back to.
I know what you're talking about. I know what you mean. This notion that
you can't experience your own death and so you just stay alive. He believed in that.
That's some heady stuff.
He said he said he believed in that and acted it out. Where again, playing Russian roulette repeatedly, like shooting the with the revolver, six whatever in the chamber. He puts a bullet in there and he survives, and then he shoots it out of the ocean and the gun goes off.
There's a movie that oh man, but keep going.
We got another caller. That's why I shouldn't even have taken that long. David from Kansas City. David, you're on the line. We don't have too much time. What's on your mind? How are you doing?
Yeah, I got a few thoughts on January 6th. I joke with my brother calling it Wednesday, of like, may Wednesday live forever in infamy. But so part of that is I feel like there's a little bit of feigned outrage around it. I'm not accusing from all of that, but I feel like there is a little bit of that. And one, I felt this going into it. I had people and associates who went to prayerfully protest, to stand outside. From the get-go, to me, it just felt like a trap. I didn't know exactly what the trap was, but the way it went down, I feel like it was set up. We're going to put these barricades up. We're going to have scaffolding all around the Capitol, and then we're going to have 6 police officers guard it. And they're just going to open the door to these people as they go in. So it felt like it was a sort of set up to have a fall guy, and then it's a changing of the rules. It's the definition of sedition, rebelling or inciting rebellion against authority of a state or monarch. If we're going to say that happened, this is, again, the whataboutism. We're looking back, like, the resistance was set up in January 2016. That was
that's the thing. We've got to close it out here. I get where you're going with that, and I made that point before too. We've been rejecting elections for years, if not decades, at this point. David, thank you for the call. Thank you everybody for listening to us this week. We've got to close it out. Have a great weekend. We'll see you all again, 7 a.m. Eastern, Monday morning. Signing off, Fault Lines.